report reasonably quickly here. The rest of it, there are a few action items in there, and just want to touch base on those. The first is the proposed modifications to the personnel policy outlined in the memo prepared by Audrey Turner and attached as attachment 7E to the board packet. In that, we're requesting that the board approve the changes proposed in that memorandum and attachment to the 2019 employment policies and procedural guidelines. And we ask for a motion to do so unless there's discussion on those.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Alvia, second by Trampy. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Item 7F is you had asked us to kind of summarize and look at what we need to think about for our next triennial salary survey, which is 2 years from now. We have identified those issues and potential solutions, issues that we heard you raised during our last discussion, or were raised internally by the staff about that survey and how it worked with our new contractor. Our suggestion on this is really just food for thought, and that before we, or as we are hiring a new contractor, probably a year from now or a year and a quarter from now, we will bring this back to you and just make sure that we're all on the same page as we go forward. But we wanted to take this opportunity to memorialize what we heard from the board, and if there's any disagreement with that, feel free to raise it now, or feel free to reach out to either Audrey or myself, and we're happy to talk about it.
Any comments or concerns? Thank you. Move along.
All right. On the River District Long-Term Financial Health 7G, there's as we noted in our last meeting, there were a number of reasons to hold off any consideration of placing a question on the ballot to our voters this year in 2019. As requested by this board, staff convened with our polling and public opinion consultant and kind of ran through some issues that we'd heard from the board, areas where I think the board could use the benefit of public polling information if you are to evaluate probably next April, whether we should move for a ballot question. And so we identified those issues here in that part of my memo. The polling, rather than conducting the polling this summer and being able to report to you now, our pollster, much to her credit, said that that's not very cost effective, because the closer you can do the polling to the actual voting date, the better off you are, and the more accurate that polling will be. And so she saved us about $27,000 and extra costs, which I appreciate. She's obviously an expert at what she does and appears to even have ethics. So we appreciated that. I do, we will continue this discussion, and I'm happy to talk more about the particulars, but I do think despite the little respite that we've been given due to the Gallagher hold on the Gallagher that the General Assembly was able to pull off this year, due to primarily the oil and gas revenues coming from northeastern Colorado, we should anticipate significant financial problems facing the district in the long term, and we really want to address this, continue to address this in a proactive manner, not a reactive manner. And so we will be bringing this back up. We have our budget workshop in September, as we always do. That will be a focus of the discussion at that point. But we would anticipate perhaps that this board may want to consider in April whether or not it's moving towards a ballot question, and at that point we can provide the public polling information that might be helpful in making some of your directions. Questions?
Mr. Akaferska, yes.
I was curious about one of these bullets under subsection G, the third bullet, which are issues we are examining. The third bullet is whether a question that references permanency of flows in the Colorado River main stem is preferred by constituents. What would that mean in terms of a ballot question?
That would relate to our.
Do you vote for
that would relate
permanency
to-
of flows?
That would relate to funding our efforts on the CRCA negotiations that we frequently, that we're engaged in. So,
And
But it would be wording in the ballot
Yep.
question, not comma.
It's specific to the acquisition of assets that would assure those flows continue this direction. Those discussions that have been ongoing with the corporate owner of certain assets that we're talking to.
and can you share what those are, what those assets are?
That's the one we've been working
We've been talking, yeah.
Key one in the
Yeah.
CRCA
Yeah, let's-
implementation.
And, you know, frankly, a number of years ago, we heard from, in particular Larry Cleaver at Grand Junction, that the measure we had on the ballot back in the early 2000s, in terms of, we'd like to, you know, be able to use this increased revenues for projects around the district.
Oh, okay, this
Yeah.
is directed at Shoshone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could be that, and it could be.
Could be any number of things.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on that? Okay. Pilot Rock Ditch in Delta, there's no action requested, just if you'll recall, you provided direction to us to work with that Pilot Rock Ditch company that, to provide emergency repair funding or evaluate doing so. We evaluated it, we did, as a staff level, determine that aid of $20,000 is appropriate. They have not submitted final receipts or requests for payment, but they do have that ditch back up and running, and we're able to irrigate for the season, initially through some creative temporary ditch and rerouting efforts, but then now that system's back up and running, so.
I think DK has another update on.
We really want to
Yeah, I know,
keep moving, so. If Dave, do you have something, or, I mean, I want to try to.
Well, what you said wasn't true. We're ready to pay the check this week.
I have not seen, Dave, anything yet, so we're not, I mean, that's my point. Until we see it,
Okay, well, your staff has seen it and it's been approved. So that's my understanding.
okay, once I see that bill and that request, we will pay it.
Okay.
And just might add that the irrigators there on that ditch system are very grateful and appreciate the help. It's really got them back in shape quickly. Thanks.
If I might add one thing, real quickly. These are the kind of things I think the River District should be doing.
I agree. Yeah.
You know, our constituents get in a jam, they're about to be impacted beyond what you and I would even really think about. And yet, the River District can come to the front, do the things that are necessary to be done, and get things moving forward. To me, I want to thank all of you guys that are working here, and that's the kind of thing I'm proud of.
Appreciate that. The next item, and John and Sonia, if you guys can briefly address this one, that would be great. This is the Battle Creek Reservoir PL 566 grant application. You remember we had a conversation with some folks from Wyoming and the Snake River Basin, including some Coloradans up there.
So in April, with Senator Larry Hicks and Pat O'Toole and the gang from the Savory Little Pothook Water Conservancy District on the Wyoming side and Pothook Water Conservancy District on the Colorado side, we're here asking requests for their application for NRCS funds through the PL 566 process. We said we would look into it. And as a result of that, I think we're comfortable with them going forward with the River District being included as a cooperating entity, with the understanding that, hey, we're not providing any funds and we're just providing our institutional knowledge and whatever information you have readily on hand, things that don't take a lot of staff time. And you'll basically will respond to some phone calls. And so they've revised they're in the process of revising their application. I think Larry said it, Senator Hicks said it was due the 18th.
Yeah, they just wanted comments back from the 18, and they
Yeah.
were nice enough to give us an opportunity to review and comment on their application.
Right, and so I think their application it needs some help, just reading through it, and Sonia can give them some help. But I think it's generally in line with that direction that, hey, we'll lend our name to it and our support for this, but we're not in this as a sponsor, and we're not in it for any significant time or money, any money. That's basically it, and that, I guess I'd just like to confirm that the board is on board with that.
So I was remembering that they hadn't actually asked for money anyway, that they had, but they were wanting to get Colorado, the state, on board with the project because Wyoming had said, well, wait a minute here, we're not going to be too involved unless Colorado gets involved. And so that they were here saying, we really need you guys to help us be a cheerleader for the project so that Colorado might become involved. That's what I kind of remember.
Go ahead, no, Sonia.
So their state, the Wyoming State NRCS office, and so Colorado's NRCS office had no knowledge about this application and this project. So when they said, well, we're kicking it back out because it's really, you should be talking to Colorado. They should be lending their support and saying, we have no problems with this, and we would support this application.
Okay.
So it was the state NRCS offices, Wyoming and Colorado, that hadn't communicated.
And they hadn't communicated.
Well, we also communicated with Senator Hicks that, hey, you really need to talk to the CRWCD and try to get CRWCD support for this as well. And honestly, I don't know where that stands.
We're unclear on that.
And honestly, that's, it's not our job to do that for them.
No. I just think it is, there is a bunch of Colorado water right holders that could benefit from this project, and I'm not advocating anything different than what I heard, other than that I think we as a river district, it's in our district, that we should be a good cheerleader for the project. Understanding we and a bunch of us were up there and met at Pat O'Toole's ranch, have said from the beginning, we don't have money. And so they've understood that. I want to make sure that we're doing what we can as moral support and any other kind of support they got.
And I agree.
And I think we are, Tom, and the only difference that I heard from them than I think what you heard was that they wanted us to be their Colorado cooperating agency.
Yeah.
They actually would have preferred us to be a co-sponsor.
Right.
But our take on it from a staff level is that the co-sponsorship potentially puts us in a financial hook position that we didn't want to be on, and so really, the message we give back to them is, we're happy to be a cooperating agency, happy to be participating on behalf of the Colorado River District and our constituents, and cheerleading, as you say, but.
We're not gonna buy the uniforms though?
Yeah.
Bill? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with any of that, but I don't want Wyoming assuming that we represent the state of Colorado.
No, absolutely.
We represent the Colorado River District and not the state of Colorado.
That's right.
And I think that's a good comment, Director Trampy, and I think that's something that we could recommend that, would clarify in their application.
Yes, sir?
Through your conversations with them, and I wish I would have asked these guys when they were here last time, but are you aware if they've been working through the watersheds group that's established with the CACD?
Honestly, Al, I'm not sure I even know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna say no.
CACD and.
Well, there's a watershed group that's made up of the conservation districts in Division 6 up in that area.
Okay.
And they represent the agricultural sector of that. And I don't know if there's even any value to that group or not, but I would think if they're looking for a sponsor or something like that, or somebody that can help them move forward, that might be another avenue for them to take a look at.
Well, maybe that's something that Sonia and I can take back to Larry and say, hey, have you looked at this as another cooperating agency?
Correct.
that could-
Yeah, and that's all I'm going for, and they might be able to share some value, because there's several districts that would be able to work cooperatively together, I think, with that, so.
Good point.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next item on there is the Water Bank Work Group. Sonia prepared a thorough update on that. Any questions on the Water Bank Work Group efforts at this point? Hearing none.
Any questions? Guess no one had any questions.
Okay.
We won't be having anybody sign a non-disclosure statement, so.
Good.
Okay,
Perfect.
next item.
Next item is the request for a contract amendment with Harvey Economics regarding Grand Lake. Mike Itel put together a very thorough memo that is in the packet under 7K. Staff is requesting that the board authorize general manager to enter into a contract amendment with Harvey Economics for an additional $25,000 to continue providing economic analysis of power generation impacts related to the alternatives being considered for the Three Lakes System NEPA analysis. Mike is here to field any questions.
Any questions on this? I just have one comment on this. Yes, sir.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. In that this kind of demonstrates the danger of having too much swinging on power. Because, I mean, power is supposed to be, power on the CBT was supposed to be the frosting. It's supposed to be the benefit. And here we are talking about, justifying the impacts to clarity of power operations. And, we're having to do a lot to say, well, this amount of power you're generating by these operations isn't worth the impacts to clarity. And I think it's very interesting to have this, going forward there, because we've got power is swinging many operations on the Colorado River system.
You'll find the power players are very influential, and
Yep.
they like to wield a strong stick. It's not the primary purpose, but it is one of the main purposes. But so is the scenic attractions of Grand Lake.
Yeah.
Right in there with it.
Yep. Hate to have the scenic
This
attractions.
is ongoing work. This contract amendment is really a kind of just, we foresee that we're going to need to go in a little deeper here over the next year or so. And so we're about to come up on a $75,000 authorization limit of the general manager, about to exceed that. So.
Yeah. So, I'm ready for a motion then on this. Do you want to make a motion, Mr. Trampy, or?
No.
With that?
So moved.
Okay. Motion by Richard, second.
And what was the motion again?
The motion was to enter into a 3-year contract with Harvey Economics at $25,000 per year. That's being split with Grand County.
Second.
Second by Whitmore.
Wait, hang on. It's just
25,000.
total.
Oh, because I was reading this, it said, it said 25,000 each, but.
I think it is each, but 25,000 for us. Ultimately, the contract we bill with them is two separate. They actually bill Grand County separately than they bill us, if I'm correct on how that works. So the 25,000 is for us, but Grand County is in for that same like amount.
Okay, so it's only 25,000 for a 3-year contract, okay. Can't get anything out of Harvey Economics for 25. So we have a motion and a second for a 25,000 3-year contract with Harvey Economics. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Directors?
Item 7L is the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan coming back to you. If you remember, you approved us to act as fiscal agent for the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan process. That effort is being funded through grants that are coming through our enterprise because of our Tabor capacity that currently exists within the enterprise. the request here has to do with just a one-time exception, if you will, for this project only, to allow for me to execute contracts without contract-specific approval by this board greater than the $25,000 delegated amount. Because this funding, if you think about it, we're really doing this work at the direction of the working group that is established by the roundtable up at the Yampa White Green. And so they are approving the contract, hiring the people, and then we are entering into the contract. We draft the contracts, our legal department does. I would execute the contract, but it's not really, frankly, our money.
Yeah,
And so rather than slow that process down and only be able to approve contracts on a quarterly basis, or in the alternative, bother all of you by calling special meetings just to approve these contracts that are really being done for the Yampa Basin Roundtable, we're asking for you to give me authority to execute contracts after review and approval of the legal department that are associated with the fiscal agency for the Yampa Integrated Water Management Plan, not to exceed $150,000, and cumulatively no more than the $425,000 that we have in our possession for the grant.
We're receiving our fee from fiscal aid.
We will be receiving our fiscal agency.
Yes, sir.
So that's based on us getting the contract signed with CRWCD, and that's kind of been, they're still working through that process as well, so anyhow, all good. Checks in the mail.
And will all of this money be expended by the end of next year?
No.
I think so.
2.5 years was the
2
estimate?
years or so.
Because what are we going to do after the end of next year when our,
Well, that is part of the long-term fiscal discussion for
Yeah.
this board. But I think the large part of the money will be expended before our Tabor capacity is impacted.
okay, that's what I was concerned about. It is that Tabor capacity essentially goes away at the end of next year.
Correct.
Okay? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to
Okay.
support that.
Motion by Vanderbrink.
Contingent upon CWCB signing of the contract.
They supposedly are really close, and I'll second that, yeah.
Okay, and second by Munger. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay.
So I have a question real quickly. Am I the only one that can't get on the internet this morning with both my phone and my
I
computer?
was having trouble too.
I got booted off and got right back on.
Is that right? Well, I got booted. I haven't been able to get booted off even, so. The island or anything, so anyway.
I was
I'm
able to
good.
get out.
We had problems yesterday, let me go see if.
They should both be working.
We'll check on that.
I won't feel picked on.
Item 7M is my mid-year review of general manager's 2019 goals and objectives. Provided those goals along with updates in bold on each one of them. Happy to chat if anybody has questions now or at any time, of course. But if there's anything in there in particular that you'd like to talk about right now, I'm more than happy to do so.
Any questions? You do, in your second year, you seem to have been successful in turning around the yield of the river system.
Yes, that was a big lift for,
Yeah.
but luckily the staff was able to make that happen. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Moving along.
All right. All right, that's it for general manager's report. I think we're actually on item 9,
Yes.
directors.
Let's see, yes, director's updates and or concerns. Let's go around, we can talk with Mr. Munger.
So, thing I guess I'd say is, Friends of the Yampa actually took a couple of us up and flew the Yampa, and then flew all the way down. We started off at the Steamboat Airport, and then we flew all the way down to Lily's Park, and then all the way down to Steamboat Rock, and then we're able to go back over to Rangeley, and then fly back up to White, and then drop down into the upper Yampa on right there at Yamco and Stagecoach. It was a great flight, so it was very interesting to see it from the air.
Yeah.
Loved great flight, so,
Yeah, it always is great to,
yeah.
changes your viewpoint.
It does, and it just kind of shows how small world we're really in here, you know, and we're all kind of each next door's neighbor, so, you know, anyhow, so it was a great. The second thing is, other than I'll be done, but I have to leave, I have to go to a AG&C meeting here in a little bit too, so I'm gonna skip out of here, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fresca.
Well, I just wanted to comment on one or two of my thoughts regarding the Four Basin Roundtable meeting we had down in Grand Junction last month. It was a really good meeting, particularly the work of John Courier and John Caron, I think is just exceptional. We had an opportunity to review that again yesterday. Something that is kind of troubling to me, for the first time we heard from a committee that is studying possible sources of revenue for the purpose of demand management funding. And something that kind of stuck in my craw was the focus of that group seems to be wanting to identify possible tax increase proposals for funding demand management. That seemed to be the crux of their direction right now. And that's troubling to me, in that when we started down the road of demand management a number of years ago, like, you know, going back to the field trip that we took in Southern California, I came away with the belief that that this could be a mechanism or a tool for those entities in Colorado that relied on the Colorado River for critical purposes but had very junior rights. That this could be a tool for them to assure that they could continue to have a flow of water, and of course my train of thought was, well, those would be folks that would pay for demand management to protect their position if we had a good workable project and enough voluntary participants. And now, you know, it's really morphing. Demand management is morphing in many ways, but it certainly is morphing in the discussion about where the money might come from for this. And so, to make a long story short, I would summarize in the direction it seems to be going is looking for public financial support to shore up a poor water position that a power generator or a front range municipality may find themselves in the future. And of course, when these folks built their water enterprise based on junior water rights, you know, I had always assumed that they were accepting the risks associated with that, but that seems to be less and less the case going forward. So the funding efforts for demand management are real troubling to me, and I thought perhaps I'm not the only one that's troubled by that.
Okay.
If I can speak to that, Steve, I definitely hear your concerns. First, as I think the board is well aware, I serve on the steering committee of the Colorado Water Plan funding effort. So when you talk about that group of people, that includes myself, and I've made several reports to the board about their progress. But I want to agree with you that you know, originally when the water bank concepts were discussed, funding was viewed as funding that should come from junior projects, and those are primarily municipal TMDs. As it evolved, and you'll remember this board really pushed a large evolution there, and that instead of wanting the water to come from the west slope and seeing the funding come from our dense urban neighbors and buying up West Slope Ag to provide the water for a demand management effort, our board pushed back very hard and said, no, we want water equity. If there's ever going to be a demand management program in the state, the equity needs to exist in the water provided to that program, meaning that it should be in relative proportion to their post-compact depletions. you'll remember from John's discussion yesterday, that's about a 60% of the post-compact depletions to the Colorado River come from the Front Range. So we pushed and said we want the water to come from there, and that's a different concept than the money, but it's directly tied to that. So if we want the water, it's also very hard to say, and you need to pay for our contributions to that. Now, I will say that I've made a couple reports in the past on the different mechanisms, the taxing mechanisms that water plant funding group is looking at on a statewide level. Remember that 85% of the people paying those taxes, if there's ever a statewide tax, are actually on the Front Range. So the vast majority of any statewide tax revenue, should it ever come to fruition, would come from the Front Range. But I will also tell you that in those discussions, both at the state level and the UCRC level, your staff, myself included, is pushing for a greater consideration as to where funding should come from if demand management ever exists. Specifically, and I think I may have referenced this earlier in my report, I believe that a lot of the demand management provides very direct benefits to the power customers who depend on the power coming out of Glen Canyon Dam. Whether it's designed to prop that power pool up or not, if it's there, it's doing that. And in fact, it was made very clear at the UCRC meeting when there was a WAPA presentation that I think I referenced in my memo. Those customers should, frankly, be paying for a large portion of demand management should it ever occur because they're getting the benefit. The lower basin is getting the benefit of having that water there, and just as we in the upper basin are avoiding the compact dispute that would take us through decades of Supreme Court litigation, so is the lower basin. And so having a basin-wide solution that doesn't ride on the back of Colorado taxpayers, I totally agree with you. But evaluating that and making sure we understand it and its implications in the state is why I'm involved in that group, to make sure we understand what's going on and why. But I hear your concerns about a tax increase of any type, and believe me, I've conveyed that to that group, but I will continue to do so. I just want to make sure you understand our role, my role in that, and frankly, if the board doesn't want me involved in that, I'll take that direction. But I think it's important for our district, and specifically for the long-term preservation of our agricultural communities, that we make sure that the equity we push for exists in the funding mechanism as well.
So there's a lot of moving parts to the potential financing of a potential demand management program. It still troubles me that the communities on the west slope that may lose agricultural production in a demand management scenario may also be asked to pay for that loss, which is kind of crazy. And so it's these changes, or I should say additions of complexity that are very troubling. And I'm happy that you mentioned the benefit that demand management may or may not have to continued uninterrupted power generation at the Glen Canyon Dam. As you recall, in the last quarterly board meeting, we contemplated the fact that the mathematics shows us that as long as there's adequate water to keep the power generators in Glen Canyon Dam turning, that the upper basin is highly unlikely to fall out of compliance with the 1922 compact. Yet I see no effort to develop a plan with Bureau of Reclamation or Department of Interior or WAPA, any of the folks that have the majority of the interest in Glen Canyon Dam power generation, to develop a plan to be certain that there will be an adequate flow of water to keep those power generators running. I see millions of dollars being poured towards a demand management possible program, and not much happening in developing a firewall to protect us against an inadequate flow to continue to generate power at Glen Canyon Dam. And so I'm raising that concern in several different quarters, and by all means, this is one of them. And would ask the board and the staff to contemplate this reality and see if we want to develop a response.
You're thinking in particular of increased snowpack augmentation.
I'm sorry.
You're thinking in particular of increased snowpack augmentation programs?
Well, you know, I'm very supportive
yeah,
of that,
yeah,
as
yeah.
well as, you know, cleaning up the invasives on
Yeah.
the river system. But I think those are the other two separate legs of the stool. And should we perhaps have a fourth leg of that stool in working with the other vested interest in the Glen Canyon Dam power generation to have some certainty as to what's going to happen if you know, if we have another paleo level drought and the flow in the Colorado River is not substantial enough to assure continued power generation, yet, you know, we're not close to falling out of compliance with the 22 compact. Then we're going to be required to regroup with Bureau of Rec or WAPA and determine how the upper basin is going to see to it that there's an adequate flow. So like there's, you know, we need to be barking up two trees, as I see it,
Yeah.
and we're only barking up one.
We always need to have a plan B.
Well, it's not a plan B, it's just,
How to
it's
respond,
a
yeah.
separate plan addressing a separate challenge.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's good points. Thank you. Karen?
I wanted to highlight a couple points that I'm always bugging Chris Treese on for everybody. One is the mussels. I'm really, really concerned about what's happening with the invasive mussels. So just anytime we have an opportunity to talk to our federal lack of funders on that issue, I think it's important to keep it highlighted. And on this, by the same token, same idea, just an ounce of prevention can save us so many millions of dollars. My disappointment with the lack of funding for prevention for the Forest Service, and just want to highlight Eagle County, Summit County this year are continuing to pour lots of local tax dollar funding to pay for Forest Service staff to do work that they should be doing, but they don't have the funding to do, which is prevention. And for us, it makes sense because a little bit of prevention can save us millions of dollars in firefighting, and we, the counties, get stuck with a lot of that to pay for these fires, even if they don't touch anything but federal lands because of assets at risk. So it just continues to be a frustration that the feds can't fund a little ounce of prevention, both on mussels and fire prevention. And then I wanted to just comment on my continued support for taxing water bottles in particular. I just think that's something that was listed in the water plan, and to me, it just makes sense if I see people going in and buying cases and cases of water bottles in our grocery stores, and if they can't understand that this is good water to drink, then they should be paying a tax that will benefit the waters of Colorado.
You mean like a deposit on plastic containers?
Well, I'm just saying a tax on that plastic water bottle full of water that isn't as good as this water.
I guess I see the benefit of a deposit would be it would encourage recycling.
Yeah. Right. That's a whole other.
Well, Karen, the water plant funding group is looking very seriously at that issue.
So Karen, I have a question. You probably researched it on the Forest Service funding for mitigation and so on. Who's the opposers on that? Is it the anti-logging groups, or what is it that are against funding for prevention? You know, cleaning up.
I think it's just appropriations,
Exactly, it's the
unwillingness
federal
to
government
appropriate
dishing
enough
money out.
funding for the Forest Service in general.
And then the fire borrowing situation. And we
I
just
thought that
got
got
past
cleared up,
the, yeah, we were just supposedly got
Next year,
maybe
maybe.
past fire borrowing remedy, maybe.
And we'll see what happens with that. That's a difficult one to deal with. Mr. Albee?
Not too much really on my mind, other than Delta County's had a very active construction season that we're still going through on many of our ditch projects. There's a lot of money being spent for mainly in connection with federal projects, but also some other private ditch work. We have had projects in Fire Mountain, Crawford, and North Delta area, so there's a lot of ditch efficiency work getting done.
Good. Glad to see that, yeah.
Yep, it's a good step. It does also, as everything, have some unintended consequences, but in general, it's a positive
Yeah.
step.
Mr. Richard?
Hunter has set up a tour of Wolford Reservoir on Thursday, August 1st from 10 to 2. Local officials are invited to that just to see what's going on out there and everything, and I'd certainly hope that he did invite all the directors and stuff to that opportunity too.
I guess he
Did
just
get a
did.
chance to
I didn't catch that last part.
Oh,
Did you invite all the directors?
I did not invite all of them, no.
Okay.
You just did, or?
I guess I just did, so,
Select.
but I do think it's an opportunity to see what's going on
Yeah.
in Wolford and have a pretty good understanding with staff there that knows what's going on and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of answer some of the questions, especially on the crack and things like that, that gives us an opportunity to see where that money's being spent. And we can watch Andy lower someone down into the.
We won't be doing that for,
Yeah.
you know, I guess I would say that tour is really oriented towards
The
Grand
local,
County and the local,
right, yeah.
the local officials. I am more than happy, and we're more than happy to set up probably a more detailed tour and meeting up at Wolford if this board wants it. You're welcome to attend that. It just, we wouldn't want to necessarily get into the same level of detail that I suspect some of our board members will want to get into. And if that's something the board wants, we can set it up. But you're welcome to show up. Just remember, it's not going to be quite as detailed as what I think a lot of our discussions have. That's all.
Okay.
But
Okay, it might be good to get the board back up to Wolford again.
sure.
Yeah. Mr. Trampy?
I think the focus in the Gunnison Basin right now, as far as water usage is concerned, is demand management. I'm going home this evening, I think I mentioned this yesterday, to a meeting that Upper Gunnison has requested with the stock growers. And the Upper Gunnison, Reby, you can fill me in more probably than I might know. And they contracted with Harvey Economics to do a survey, a study of the impacts that demand management might have on the Gunnison agricultural people. And so Harvey Economics and Frank and John are going to meet with the stock growers tonight and get all their ideas about how demand management is going to be affecting our stock grower group. And frankly, I don't think the ranchers have a good enough idea of all the impacts. I think it'd be more of a session where the ranchers are going to be asking a lot of questions rather than providing much input. But John McLeod indicated to me the other night that he and Frank were going to use this as a method of obtaining information that they could use in their serving on these work groups. And that was really their focus on having the meeting tonight. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. Frankly, I think it's premature. This is just my own personal opinion. I think it's premature to be trying to ferret information from the ag community as to what it's going to cost them and all that kind of stuff, because there isn't a program put together that we know whether we even want to volunteer for it. So, it's just more of the confusion that's surrounding demand management.
Thank you. Oh, did they ever recover John's car?
Pardon?
Did they ever recover John's car?
Yeah.
They did, okay, just what, just hit me. when you
That was
were
a
down
few
the clock.
months ago, correct?
What's that?
Unless he had another one.
Yeah.
Back in January,
I was at the Water Congress.
Water Congress. It just hit me when you mentioned John McLeod, yeah.
It's the price you pay for using valet parking. apparently.
Yes. Mr. Gray?
Well, up in the Yampa, one of the things that I wanted to report was, this Yampa River Fund that's, it's kind of been formed. It was headed up by TNC to get started. But, I mean, it's going places. It's got, $2 million grant and another matching pledge of $1 million, so if you give $1, that they'll match it. So it's on the path to $4 million already. And Doug and I have both been working with that group and getting the charter and getting the guidelines kind of set up. And I'm really a little bit nervous about when you have that much money, how it might go, or where it might go, and what kind of things. We've been somewhat successful in making sure that it aligns with the integrated water management plan, which is then has to be vetted through roundtable processes, so that money would be funneled into those kind of projects that the roundtable approves of. However, probably not solely limited to that, although in our charter pledging that it's going to be legal and vetted and so forth. But one of the positive things, and in the charter now, is that there's no money to go for ag leasing. It's limited to paying for water released from storage to augment river flows. And we've pushed that really hard, and that we have it in the charter right now, that this fund is not going to use money to take water off the field and put it in the river. It's first, where we can, of course, we have limited storage in our basin, but we do have some storage. And the owners of that storage have to feel like they can release water, even if there's money to do it, that they can refill and all the stuff that reservoir management operations does. But I do feel pretty good about the fact that so far we haven't limited to paying for water to be released from storage to augment flows. And besides all the riparian work and the things that this fund is pledging to use for it, bottom line, its biggest thing is those who want to see more water in the river in August. So, but there's a lot of money, and it's still coming in. So I don't know, Doug, if you had anything to add to that, but I do think, as it relates to the river district, is that we have storage. We not only in the Yampa Basin, but other basins. And it became evident in one of our fund meetings that owners of storage are willing to release water a heck of a lot cheaper than farmers are willing to lease water. And so the light kind of came on of, well, gee whiz, that's the most economical way to put water in the river is to release it from storage. And unless you're out of storage, it's the way that you can help people maintain their storage and even maybe build storage at some point for these river flows. And we understand now, I say we because there's a lot of, I was kind of amazed at how many people on this working group really didn't they get it, but they had to be reminded that you don't have any new water to get. It's only retiming of water. If you want more water in the river in August, you have to retime the flows. That's all you got. And so I have some optimism that this is a path that the River District could benefit from in other basins as money seems to be really readily available from other sources for environmental purposes. However, the danger is steering it in a direction that doesn't get out of hand.
Thank you. Mr. Catlin?
Well, things in the Uncompahgre Valley are good. You know, I mean, you can't believe that in one short year, you can go from, you know, nearly 50% to demand water most of the summer. It's been an odd spring. It stayed wet a long time. It was hard to get in the field. It was hard to get some of the crops planted on time. And this, by working the ground wet in the spring, you pack it tight. It won't hold water. The holding capacities are about this deep. You irrigate it, and 3 days, 4 days later, you got to irrigate it again. So we're probably using more water. Good thing we've got it. The crops are starting to, you know, they're starting to jump out of the ground now. Looks like Olathe sweet corn will pick pretty much on time, 23rd, 24th of July. There for a while, we didn't know if we'd be on schedule because it was so oddly cold and wet. Most of the people in the Uncompahgre are doing well. The ditches are full, things are happening. Just something that goes along with where I'm from and some of my experience is I think one of the things the state of Colorado really needs to start taking a look at is funding on this water conservation. You know, every conversation about water is supposed to start with conservation. Well, okay, cool. But how are we going to pay for that? It seems to me that some of these earthen-lined canals and all and ditches, if they were lined and piped, we would start picking up some water that we'd be able to do things with downriver or, you know, those kind of things. Because in a lot of these areas, in my area particularly, you can lose 20% pretty easily in the delivery system. I'd like to see the state of Colorado push on that. That's one of the things that I try to do in Denver, is to get CRWCD and some of these folks aware that, hey, some help here would help us get grants to do some of these other things. So, you know, it's a continuous windmill, and I continue to joust it. We did improve your easement rights so that if you decided you wanted to do that, you wouldn't have to have a lawsuit against you to stop you from it. And back to reservoirs. In order to get the water to do what we want it to do at the time we want it to do it, you have to have a bucket up above where you want it to do what you want to do. They don't have to be the size of Blue Mesa, but certainly some of these smaller areas could really do, you know, that's something I think, and I'm hoping that the water plan, we keep trying to fund it so that it'll work. But retiming, like was mentioned earlier, is a big deal. And maybe we can start to break down the wall that reservoirs are bad when you can raft on the river late in the summer because you had a reservoir up above you. Maybe that's a selling. There is a lot of concern in my community in regards to demand management. They don't know how it will work, where it will work, who will get to work it, those kind of things. There's an awful lot of rumor about what's being contemplated. I think we're in a dangerous position in time that people are coming around and talking to growers as water is a crop. I don't agree with that. I think water is an asset to the financial statement of that grower. It's not just another crop. The problem is the crops that we raise today are so cheap that there's going to be a financial incentive to say, you bet, sign me up. I'll take that 500, I'll take that 600, whatever it is, and I'll run with that. That worries me because of the economic activity that each irrigated acre would create, that it does create on a renewal basis every year. But if you can't make money farming, pretty soon you don't buy seed, fertilizer, and everything else, so that ground might sit empty again without ever being paid for. But I think the time is right about now that we're gonna have to take a good hard look at how badly does the community want their area to be farmed? You know, I'm not talking, you know, I'm not a subsidy guy, but we're gonna have to have that conversation. What's the true cost of water? Is it just paid to the farmer? What about the communities that end up sending water downriver? And the River District's been good about bringing that conversation forward. But I think we're gonna have to have it. So, other than that, I'm glad I live in Colorado, regardless of some of the trouble. I wouldn't trade going someplace else, so, thanks.
Ms. Chandler Henry, you seem to have jumped in, walked in right at the big
Just in
hold on.
time, my apologies.
Director's concerns, yes.
Some sort of canyon calamities.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so my apologies. Not too much to update. In Eagle County, we did have some flooding just last week from the high waters. Red Cliff flooded Turkey Creek, and it was close to taking out a bridge with the power line attached to it, but it did not. And Gypsum had some flooding along the Eagle River. Basalt is holding its own. The mountain is staying where it's supposed to stay and not sliding down, so that is good. We've got some of our irrigators looking at micro hydro. All of the Colorado River ranches are gravity-fed irrigation, and they're looking at the possibility of generating some electricity from those flows. And then the only other thing is we're underway with our integrated stream management, which is being called the Community Water Plan.
Thank you. Alden.
I'll summarize the best I can, because we've got a fair amount of activity going on the White River. There's a lot of people that are busy collecting data and getting ready to take on the next step. So the River District's been actively participating in that algae study that's been going on the White River. Last year we had extremely low flows, and now this year we've got really high flows. So we actually wanted to do a 3-year sampling, and we're hoping that next year we get average flows, because we want to use that as a determining factor. So we can at least get all three sides of that. But this spring, we were really hoping to do some isotopic analysis of some of the water, which really takes a look at it. Gives you a primer as to what would be the specific contaminant. We took 9 samples and we got 7 hits. So those are off in Virginia right now being analyzed, and it takes quite some time, several months, to get this analysis done. And we're hoping really that we can come back with some positive results to kind of give us some very focused direction on what's causing this. So there's still lots of speculation and people pointing fingers, of course, with me being one of them. Everybody's got their own theory. So, but they're progressing with that as well. And there's lots of sampling that USGS is doing there yet. So the programmatic biological opinion. You know, the White River is the last one in the state. It's the last one in the upper basin states to be done. And I know why. Man, what a complex issue that is, and we're working 20 years from starting and stopping to get this thing done. Just this past week, we finally got off the ground again. They reorganized with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with the state of Colorado, with us, and all the other partners that are involved in that, with a more realistic schedule to really get this thing moving forward. There is some concerns that we have moving forward that future depletions may not be fully accounted for, because the White River has a substantial amount of conditional water rights due to the vast natural resources that we have. And they have a fair amount of holdings, but they've got an awful lot of vested interest in that part of the world too, which requires a lot of water. So that's really where the big complexity comes into is figuring out how much water is realistically for the future needs, and when is the future needs. A lot of it's market driven, but when it happens, it's going to go real quick because those rights are sitting there ready to rock and roll. And they're not only storage, but they're also direct diversion. So until they get their storage, they can directly divert out of that river and start clicking along. So I'll be talking more with some River District staff about this, getting to the weeds with them to update them. But I know I've been working on that PBO now myself for pushing 4 years. And I got 2 years more to go with this thing. But I know it's going to get done. So, it's been a very frustrating process, flushing out some people and some processes that necessarily don't work. So, but I feel very confident that we're gonna have a very good PBO at the end. The demand management work group. Yesterday, unfortunately, I had to step out briefly for another, engagement that I had, but, I know I hear other guys talking about it and hear other directors as well, and I have some concerns as well, because I looked through this entire list, and I looked through it several weeks ago when it became available, and I don't see any representation for the White River on there. Not one individual. And I'm curious to know if there's any other basins within Colorado that do not have adequate representation. But yet I see that there's several people on there, or organizations that are represented that have no actual skin in the game, but yet they're driving the discussion. That's a real concern to the folks within the county that I represent. Somebody's making decisions for them, but yet they don't get any input. So, and then going behind closed doors, where's the transparency? That continues to drive my constituency and myself and my board, with concerns. State of the river, we had that, during, in April, I believe was when it was, May, excuse me. It wasn't a huge turnout. But one of the things that I've been trying to do and make a conscious effort is to start stimulating and working with our future water leaders, our future decision makers. So we asked a small group of 4-H students, or 4-H club, that was age 6 to 12, and they presented at the State of the River. Actually, Andy, I'm sorry, but they did steal the show.
Oh, I know. They're
Jim,
much more interesting.
But when I have a 9-year-old young man up there that's in a full suit giving his presentation, because this is a local fishing club, but that local fishing club is out there wanting to learn about water ecology as a whole and how that whole system works. So we've been engaging that group more within Rio Blanco County, because the 4-H group is the largest growing group, the fastest growing group for youth within Rio Blanco County. So we've been putting a lot of effort towards that. And it was good to see that. Though we didn't have a huge turnout to our State of the River, we had some very key community members that were there. They took an awful lot away from what was shared by the River District. And there was a lot of follow-up conversations. I don't know, I sent them to you, I gave them your information. I don't know if they called you or contacted you or not. But it changed a whole lot of community thought processes, and changed the level of discussion to where there's actually some pretty significant water planning going on with several folks within the White River. And I don't know what that's gonna entail in the end, but I know they're at least planning for something now, and they're doing long-term planning. A 50-year planning period is what they're really looking at. So that's very encouraging. Now, this weekend, we have, what started out as just a phone call with a gentleman saying, can I dump in a seaplane on your reservoir 3 years ago? Has actually now morphed into a seaplane being donated to our local college, which we have an aviation program, that's CNCC. And they are now opening up a new seaplane pilot certification program as part of their aviation program. That is this Saturday, and we are doing a specific address to aquatic nuisance species and decontamination of these planes. I will be spearheading that discussion. And we do a physical decontamination right there in front of anybody that would like to show up. The 4-H kids will be part of that as well. Any chance, again, we bring them in. And then we also have several planes coming in to do their little demonstration at the reservoir. People get a ride in them if they can get access to them, but go through the planes. Usually we have 2 or 3. I would imagine this year we'll probably have several more. I haven't heard any confirmed commitments on that. But and then we get other wheel planes that buzz the canyon there going through Taylor Draw, which is pretty cool when you hear that sound roaring through that that natural amphitheater running through there. So past couple years, we've had anywhere from 200 to 300, maybe more people that show up to that. And that marina parking lot is jam-packed. So, and this is an all-day event with a dedication by CNCC with this new program. So what came from a very simple, hey, can I dump in your reservoir? Let's see if we get in trouble for it, has now actually really morphed into something quite more substantial. So, and right now, it's the only one that we know of within our region. So, then finally, the last thing I have, June 3rd, I lost, I shouldn't say, our community lost Peggy Rector. She passed away. She was a director here. She was on my board since the early 1980s. I know there was the Rio Blanco Herald Times did by far the best write-up that I read, and if you would like to see that, I can share it with you. But I know she was also a member of this board there for a period of time, a county commissioner, very well involved and had her fingers in an awful lot across the state. So, but I didn't know if you knew that, but I want to make sure I shared that with you. So,
Director Vandenbrink, to let you know, the River District did send flowers to Peggy's service in her memory and a card to her.
excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie.
We also, for those of you who Warner Dewey, we made a donation to the Lake City Council of the Arts that Warner was involved in his memory.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Ezard?
Well, mine's short and sweet, but, I agree with Bill, on the Upper Gunnison meeting with the stock growers. They're asking for all the volunteers, for everyone in the ag community to volunteer. I think it's a little premature also, and, you know, we don't know what to expect. None of us do. However, we've experienced a drought that, you know, may take some of us out anyway. And then the water situation is like several of the other directors. We're still freezing at night off and on the majority of the time. Couldn't go on the BLM. Grass just isn't growing. Forest Service, for a change, had more grass than the BLM.
Your last frost may be next year.
Maybe, but, anyway, and then as Andy said yesterday, with Frank Kugel having a job offer, I don't know what that's gonna do as far as the Upper Gunnison, but I'm sure they'll go forward, obviously. And then we were talking last night, and I asked about Martha, and I was told that she took early retirement. I was wondering if the staff can just let us know, maybe when someone's not there anymore. Just, you know, just concerned that they're okay and that, you know, everything's fine. And also that the program, the early retirement, how that's going.
I can tell you that Martha did retire. There's some concern about personnel issues in terms of how we publicize what individual personnel have decided and offers they've accepted. And so there are privacy concerns involved in that. And that's why we haven't publicly provided that information if we haven't been given permission to do so by the employees. But the retirement program did achieve its goals, and so we had 4 employees accept that offer. So that's a positive from the fiscal perspective of the district.
Well, and I appreciate that, and it's my assumption why Martha left, so I probably should not have said that the way I did, but, anyway, so it's good to hear that what you were trying to do is working.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Whitmore?
As everyone else, I mean, we've had a wet early summer. We had a lot of snow, still have a lot of snow. They just got an engineer pass open yesterday. Imogene still is not. So until this last week or so, same thing, cold nights, but it is starting to melt. The good news is everybody was concerned about flooding. We haven't had flooding. It's just been kind of a nice steady runoff. However, we have a lot of concerns about the avalanche remains, debris. It's everywhere. So, so that's been kind of a community concern. Thank you very much for the support in sending staff to do the State of the River presentation in May. Peter and Jim did a fabulous job. It's noticed, and we had a good attendance. It is noticed by the commissioners, the county commissioners, it's noticed by people in the community. They're very, very pleased and grateful to be on the stop, you know, for some, for more information. And also, the district has been very generous with Ouray County in assisting us in doing our needs study a few years ago, and then in the current study that we're just about to wrap up on solutions. And Right Water has been doing those studies for us. The initial report we had last week. Interestingly, last year, had we taken just the peak diurnal flows, so not interfering with any senior water rights, but just the peak, last year, we could have gotten 8,000 acre feet that we could have stored in Ridgeway Reservoir, because Lord knows Ridgeway Reservoir had plenty of room to store. But that's huge. I mean, it's mind-boggling. That would have helped a lot with satisfying the call from Uncompadre Valley, and would have made a huge difference for a lot of our ranchers. It's not wet water, but it's augmentation water. However, in a year like this, where there's plenty of water, there's no room in Ridgeway Reservoir, so we still are looking at storage options. And we've kind of come full circle from thinking maybe there was another better way, and we're pretty much full circle back into looking at an already decreed location from the Dallas project that produced Ridgeway Reservoir. So thank you again to the district, because that study is a huge thing for Ouray County. It's information that nobody has ever put together for Ouray County. And so I think it's going to be very helpful. The commissioners are being very supportive. We're going to find a way to probably get a water rights filing done before the end of the year, before CRWCD makes its filing. And so thank you. Again, that's assistance that we greatly appreciate. And just because you brought it up, I think the only person we have from the upper Uncompadre, and maybe even from Montrose County, Mark, I don't see anybody that I recognize from Montrose County. The only person we have on this anywhere is Carrie Dennis. So, you know, we're slim on representation as well.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple things. Number one, sort of related to financial concerns and everything else. Chris and I were at one of the Building a Better Colorado meetings. I'm not sure who else attended around the state, but I did get an invite. Congratulations, you won or whatever. A chance to go to the next round where they're going to get together. Everybody, Reeves is having a meeting in August with 3 representatives from each of the 37 communities apparently, and I was one of the ones that was picked on that, so I'll be going down for that, see what they want to do as that goes. It's really lucky. It's on a Friday afternoon in Littleton, so I may not get back until Sunday or something. Who knows? But you know, the state is groups of the state are trying to see what can be done. We'll see what happens in this November with the various election issues that are on the ballot. I did, when I met with the county commissioners 2 days ago, one of the concerns they expressed was the on the demand management issue. Essentially, there seems to be a fear factor being generated with it. And they're concerned with the tenor of everything. Well, we have to do this, otherwise we're going to get taken over. And they were concerned with some of the tone that has been coming out on the demand management. It's that You know, we need to make sure that, you know, I know Andy is very strong in this, we're standing up for Western Colorado water users in this. And then we're not just saying, well, we'll do it ourselves before someone else does it to us. We're protecting Western Colorado water use on this, so that needs to be come forward, so. Otherwise, let's move on to the next agenda item.
Can I just, I want to take a quick moment, sorry, to go back to the issue related to the Pilot Rock ditch. I wanted to say I apologize, I want to make an apology to Dave Kanzer. Dave is correct that all of the documentation was provided. I actually saw it while traveling last week and had forgotten, so I apologize to the board for not being on top of that. That was on me and certainly not on Dave.
When you look at things on your phone, sometimes that moves on down the whole list.
All my fault.
It doesn't come back up again, yeah. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Treese, External Affairs?
Yeah, actually, Jim, you want to lead off?
Good morning. As has been referenced, we went through our State of the River season, and we had 11 of them. And there's generally good attendance, and even though Al was bad-mouthing his own, it was almost by design that we did a daytime one there, and we did meet people we wouldn't see at night necessarily from a regularly scheduled meeting of community leaders. So I call it a success, and I think he really was too. Uray was great, Mesa was great, Summit's always great. I didn't do as many this year, but the staff spread out, and I think everybody had a degree of success. So I think we can consider them a River District franchise. The next thing I want to talk about is our upcoming seminar. It's a Wednesday. That's a Wednesday, September 18th. Not at Two Rivers Convention Center, but at Colorado Mesa University. And it's the day before your board budget retreat, not the day after. So there's 3 variables, and it'll be interesting to see who shows up where. But we got boxed out by renovations at Two Rivers Convention Center, and so we couldn't have it there. So we're going to Colorado Mesa University. The theme is uncertainty, count on it. And it's about feast or famine on the Colorado River. And we have the likes of Ann Castle talking about actions have consequences on the Colorado River, looking at interim guidelines and drought contingency planning. We're going to have a lower basin representative coming from Terry Fulp's office to talk about drought contingency planning going into interim guidelines 2.0. Andy's going to provide an upper basin perspective on such things. We're going to talk about basic hydrology. Eric Kuhn's going to talk about his book, Science Be Damned. And Brad Udall is going to talk about when hydrology and climate collide, and that's really going to get to the heart of over-releases, what we would consider over-releases from PAL to MEAD.
Jim, one question with the school back in session at CMU, how's the parking situation going to be?
Well, I think we worked it out that we're going to be okay. But
because I've had troubles there in the past on parking.
Yeah.
We'll have a dedicated, not dedicated, but we'll have a lot that we can use.
Okay.
It's not the garage, but it's a lot just across campus, and we'll include that with the registration information.
Okay.
So, coming up, registration's open. If you all are coming, let us know. We need a head count for lunch, and hopefully we'll see as many board members there as possible. And hopefully having a different day of the week and a different venue is not going to hurt us too badly. So we'll be pushing out marketing at almost as we speak.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. If I had a follow-up question, please. Well, I think going to CMU is going to be fine. I've been to some conferences there with really large groups, and things seem to work very well. I just wanted to ask, I haven't checked yet, is Eric's book available on Amazon?
No.
Is it available
It's
anywhere?
still, I think that's October-ish. So So, but if you want to read a manuscript, he'll send it to you.
Okay.
But, what the book concerns is that, we knew the science running up to the Colorado River Compact about hydrology and potential drier periods than were known in the 20 years before the compact, but we chose to ignore them. And the lesson, of course, is, what are we going to do going forward? Are we going to pay attention to science or not? I think it's going to be a bestseller. I pre-ordered mine on Amazon.
All right, Alicia and I wanted to give you all a quick update on the education and outreach efforts that the external affairs team is undertaking. I want to thank Alicia. The EA team's in a bit of a time of transition. With Martha's departure earlier in the year, we've been leaning more and more on Alicia for her assistance, and she's been an outstanding addition to the team, so thank you. Ultimately, in January, you all were presented with the 2019 outreach plan. You approved that plan, and we're moving forward quickly in that. That involves largely on-the-ground outreach events, so kind of the boots on the ground, and then also our traditional hard copy, online, digital communications efforts. It also includes the development, which we discussed at the second quarterly board meeting with you, of an extensive multimedia marketing effort intended to increase overall visibility in every county that we serve, increase public understanding of our mission and the work that we do, and ultimately just brand recognition of the district. We want positive name recognition up for a variety of reasons. That also involves, as we discussed in March, the onboarding of 2 outside sources of assistance for digital and video content assistance. The first is Vital Films. Some of you will see me and a couple of camera folks out in your neck of the woods over the coming weeks. I want to thank Director Richard for giving us an amazing tour of the high country in Grand County last week. And ultimately, we're developing new educational content for online use, but also something that we can use at the seminar end when we're speaking to groups throughout the district. It should provide the goal is for that effort to provide a good tool for our both on the ground and online efforts. And then do you want to give a quick overview of HBZ and where they're at?
Sure.
Or at least what they're up to?
Sure. HBZ Design is who we contracted with to help us with planning our social media outreach programming and our design of a new logo. We are also working with them to make sure that all of our advertising and marketing efforts are clear and concise and the messaging matches what we've found in our polling. We have worked with staff on updating our logo. We do have a new logo at this point in time that I think Zane will be discussing with you guys a little bit later, but that's just kind of a high-level overview of HBZ Design.
And with that in mind, if you want to pass those out, HBZ worked with Alicia, me, and we held a series of meetings with the staff to discuss what we liked and didn't like about our logo that appears to be, was beginning to appear a bit dated and was tougher to use in online advertising forums. And just it was challenging across multiple mediums. So we came up with the staff's input and with Andy and the team a new logo that we're showing to you today. It incorporates much of the original logo, but it adds into it a little bit of demonstration of our position on the west slope. So it keeps the key elements of the snowflake in the water, but we attempted to add in an extra element just demonstrating our geographic location.
So the snowflake in the water on the west side of the mountain?
Correct. Correct. We'll have a variety.
Caught on to that.
A variety of different versions that we can use intended for professional materials, business cards, letterheads, as well as marketing materials like the ones you see in front of you, annual reports or magazine type publications, and of course online and social media usage. So that's, we wanted to just make sure you were in the loop. We have not rolled it out yet. What you have in front of you is just a proof that Alicia and I worked on last week to get put together so you could have a hard copy to kind of look at. Yeah.
My only recommendation is make that mountain a flat top mountain.
Big red mesa.
The world's highest flat top.
Great. Any
So it
thoughts
makes
or
it-
input?
It just makes it more usable instead of having this long logo only.
That's exactly right. And it's more cost effective from an advertising perspective. You can use it in online ads easier without running just a banner, so.
Well, I really appreciate that it was done in-house and we didn't have a lot of hoopla, like Mesa County experience a while ago. And we did ours a few years ago and sort of did it on the down low, which worked well because it can be very controversial.
Well, Andy did want us to have it all.
The issue is with our logo.
Andy did want us to have it all ready to roll out all at once with business cards, letterhead, so that it's one fell swoop. We're not dragging it out over to you.
So it has not come out, rolled out at this point in time. This is just kind of a preview for you guys. We're hoping within the next couple weeks we'll get it fully rolled out.
Can we still wear throwback shirts?
Of course you can wear whatever you would like.
Just put a little amount.
All right.
One more thing, the news summary, we're still doing them. It's gonna be a different format, in that there won't be a 8.5 by 11 style PDF that looks like a traditional newsletter. Let Dean describe the new format.
So we were using a lot of time and resource putting that newsletter or news summary into multiple different versions. One for MailChimp, that is our email distribution system. One through an InDesign, a complicated Adobe system to put together more of a newspaper like format. We are working with HVZ Designs to come up with a format that'll be utilizing our online email system, but it will be printer friendly. For those of you that like to print it out, provide it to constituents. I don't anticipate you'll have any problems with that. So it'll just save us some time, increase efficiency, and we don't have to ask Jim to slog away on InDesign for hours at a time after a busy work week with the board meetings. So yeah, so expect a new look incorporating this logo and a lot of the aesthetic that you see in that. And as always, we welcome your feedback, or if you have any issues, or just let us know.
I would just add, I think the staff is very excited about the new logo and the kind of the updated marketing efforts. There are certainly perspectives that say, why are we doing this? Is this really where we should be spending our effort or money or resources? But really, when our own in-house team and our consultants, they're right in terms of staying relevant and fresh, if you will, in people's minds. It really matters how we connect with them in the digital world, which is very different than when we last designed our logo. And so trying to really be able to connect on those digital platforms is essential for our district and our educational component, as well as connecting with our constituents. So I really appreciate the efforts of the team getting this launched and getting it moving. It is exciting to see it happen.
I would just ask that the proof of the rack card you have in front of you, that's not for public distribution at this point. We have a couple of changes we want to make to it before. We'll be printing in bulk, and we'll make sure that each of you receive those. That's the kind of thing that we see as an important leave behind when you're out in your communities or at a water meeting. Feel free to take that and shared constituents in your community. Yes?
We have several folks that don't quite have internet yet. Would there be the ability to maybe incorporate a phone number?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We'll put your cell number on it.
No.
Yeah, okay.
No, we're happy to do that, and that's one of the revisions that
Okay.
I wanted to make is
Good point.
a general email address and a general phone number there.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, onward. I need to dial in. If you don't mind, I'm gonna dial in Gail Berry, our contract lobbyist who wanted to join us for the state of affairs call.
You know, I can remember in 1996 when our method of publicizing was, I got a news release in the mail from Chris Cheese, Wolford Mountain Reservoir, open.
I had a transportable computer. It was about the size of a sewing machine.
Hi Gail, it's Zane Kessler and Chris Treese and the River District Board of Directors, and
Good morning.
thank you for joining us. Members of the board, we have Gail Berry, one of our two sets of eyes and ears down at the Capitol, assisting Chris and I last session, and will continue to assist us next session. So she's on the phone to provide color commentary and some input on JBC and other things. So, with that, we'll dive straight into the state affairs update. I think you've all seen the memo. An updated legislative spreadsheet is here for your review if you need. It was a busy session for us. It was a whole new world down at the state capitol with one party controlling both chambers and the governor's office. Things moved much faster than previous sessions where there was a little bit more balance or at least a check in place. So for me personally, it was drinking through a fire hose, and it was very fast paced, but I do feel as though it was a successful session for us. At the top of the list for me was, and kind of a theme of the session in the water community, was funding. There was adequate funding in the general fund to feed many mouths around the state. Obviously, many of those mouths are bigger than the water communities when it comes to transportation, education, and other issues. But we were successful in securing some needed funding for water plan implementation, as well as a handful of other items outlined in your memo. Tying back to my initial comment on just the fast-paced nature of it, we saw that in a couple of bills, including House Bill 1218, that moved very quickly, and it caused a lot of concern in some communities. I would say one of our greatest successes last session was that the River District was able to thread that needle. We were able to successfully amend out the most concerning provisions of that bill, and ultimately the bill did not pass. But our seat at the table and our ability to influence and build a relationship with the new chair of the House Ag Committee was important. The interim committee will be discussing the in-stream flow program more generally speaking. The intel that I've received from members of the House and Senate Ag Committees are, specifically in the Senate Ag Committee, is that there's no interest in revisiting a bill that is just a rehashed version of what we saw in 1218 last time. So I think that should provide some solace to folks who are concerned about that. We don't know yet what we're going to see, but the River District is actively engaged in communications, in subgroup of the Water Congress State Affairs Committee, as well as hosting a couple of meetings between proponents and opponents of that bill from last session, just as a neutral mediary to try and facilitate a discussion at the very least. So, other funding issues, of course, was the online sports betting bill that passed at the very end of the session. if approved by the voters, because that was a referred measure, that would provide meaningful dollars towards implementation of the water plan. It is not a silver bullet, and one concern that I and I think others in this room share is that the voters may perceive that effort as having solved our water problems. But we're participating in conversations around that effort. At a certain point, we'll have to step back as it gets into more campaign-type conversations. But one thing we've been saying out on the ground is that it provides an important down payment for the water plan. And it's better than the $8 to $12 million we don't have currently. So beyond that, I was going to ask Gail to jump in and talk a little bit about the JBC efforts to fund the water plan last session and commitments for future sessions, as well as just a JBC update in general. Gail?
Great, thanks, Zane. And what he described is just so accurate. It's what we were seeing last year, and certainly getting that commitment. The Joint Budget Committee last year, we will be right there at the table and through this interim reminding the JBC members, who's talking to them one-on-one, that they have a verbal commitment to put $10 million into water for the funding for next year as they are starting up the budget, and reminding them of those commitments. As Zane detailed the sports betting, that we don't know if that will pass or not. We really did score a major victory in getting that to fund water, but it is still an unknown, and it wouldn't take effect immediately anyway. So it's very important that we continue with the JBC to get funding in the budget for next year. As far as process, that is really in the beginning stages right now. The Governor's Budget Office, OSTB, is putting together their requests from all of their departments and their philosophy and the Governor's priorities. Right now, they really have been getting that input from the departments. They have to work up their draft budget, and it is to be submitted to the JBC by November 1st. So these next few months are very busy for them and what they'll be doing. So that's really what's going on. The interim committees, as Zane has detailed in his memo, is the other important thing going on. But certainly we'll be staying in touch, because it's all about budget. We heard the economic forecasts, and they're still solid. Certainly a lot of caution out there with global economics and economies and just the economy in general, but so far it's solid, and the revenues continue to be strong coming into the state.
Thank you, Gail. Much appreciated.
Are there any questions for Gail? And I do. I have a question. Gail, I'm hearing more and more about a possible special session for budget issues because of the revenues that are coming in. The revenues are coming in strongly, and revenue forecasts have turned around from the April forecast that the budget was predicated on. So there seems to be money on the table, and there's at least an interest among some in the administration and the legislature to entertain the thought of a special session to make sure that that money isn't left on the table and that they have a chance to allocate it according to their priorities.
Yes, that is exactly right. I'm hearing about those things as well. The special session continues to be a discussion, but not real sure where that is going to go. As always, any year, any governor, any party, it is more about politics and policy. Oftentimes when you talk about a special session, but Governor Polis did say he does not, and many of you may have seen this in the media, but he did say he does not see benefit to having a special session if there can't be a bipartisan agreement reached ahead of time. And there are several Republican senators that I believe have been part of some of those discussions on Tabor policy, a Tabor bill, some of the spending dollars, some potential reductions in state income tax as a trade-off for keeping revenues. It's still an ongoing discussion. Many compromise would have to be reached and call a special session quickly before the ballot is certified. If there's to be a change, of course, to the Tabor issue that's on the ballot this November. So we are quickly losing that window. I believe it's August 1st, and for the legislature to do something and take action prior to that,
2 weeks.
there would have to be an immediate special session. So I think it's less likely, but it's still possible and still kind of a moving target. Chris, thanks.
Thank you, Gail.
Alden, you have a question? Alden?
Yes, sir. I've asked this question a couple of times, and I keep asking because I just want to make sure I get the best available answer possible, is severance tax funds. Are we seeing any changes to that? Increases, decreases? Are we getting some fingers looking at maybe dumping in there? Or how is that fund looking? Is there any changes to that coming?
Yeah, the reduction, good question. There are reductions in severance tax revenues that are coming into the state. They lag a bit, as you know, and so we're not seeing, I think, the total impact that we will be seeing from those. But changes in policy, changes in reduction in permits issued and production will be coming forward with a reduction. And as we all know, mostly the impact is on the oil and gas at this point. And those policies, and talking with KOGA, they're tracking those very, very closely, and what's going on with the changes that came to pass by the legislation of last year.
To answer that a little further, and I think it was maybe part of your question, I have not heard of, and Gail or Zane can correct me, I haven't heard of any structural changes proposed, any changes other than watching carefully the revenues as they come in, increase or decrease, and that's driven by both new production as well as pricing.
Although I
Yeah.
would add that, as is noted in the memo, one citizen initiative has been approved for signature gathering that would significantly increase the severance tax on oil and gas operations.
Right. And at this point, the allocations that are in place right now for the revenues that do come into the state, there may not be enough severance tax revenue to fund it. I think, Chris, what you were thinking out there. So there probably will be additional discussions in the legislature next year, as those formulas may not have enough money to fund all of the priorities, the tiers, the fund this first and then fund this next. That may very well be a topic of some updates and discussion too.
Thanks, Gail.
So a comment related to that, there is money apparently going to be set aside for funding the water plan implementation grants. But the severance tax question goes to the funding for the WSRF funds. And the implementation for the water plan grants, they've made clear that they don't want to approve grants that are to be used for rehabilitation and repairs to infrastructure. And I think that's very short-sighted. And the WSRF grants have been used for repairs, and if that gets cut back, it's going to have a real impact on our water systems.
I appreciate that. One potential approach for that would be in talking, as Gail and I talk with JBC staff leading up to the session, try to figure out, they've made future commitments to provide an additional $10 million in the coming 2 years. If there's a way to direct some of that towards the WSRF, which did receive 2.5 from the general fund last year, but that's obviously pales in comparison to some of the other. It does, I would agree with you that it's an important fund, and we've got to figure out how to balance these general fund allocations.
Yeah, our cheapest water supply is what we've got already.
Yeah.
If we let that go downhill, that's very short-sighted.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Zane, you mentioned a possible ballot initiative to increase severance taxes on the oil and gas industry. Has that been assured to be on the ballot? And secondly, does that modify the direction that those taxes would go towards?
No, but the answer to the second question is no. The answer to the first question is I'm not exactly sure. It's been approved for signature gathering. My expectation is that it would probably come in 2020, not 2019. And no telling whether they're successful in their signature efforts either. So it's not a done deal by any means. It's along the lines of, or it's in the same position as the Wolf Reintroduction Citizen Initiative that, again, as Clear Title Board has received the authorization to go out and collect signatures. So,
Thanks.
Is there a clock that starts running? When does that clock start running with a signature collection? You don't have forever on that, but.
right. I don't know that. We can ask
90
our
days or
legislative
something,
counsel,
or-
yes.
Yeah.
I do want to, and I'm remiss in not having introduced him earlier, Matt Becker, who's with Legislative Council of the State Capitol and kind of the brains behind the Interim Water Committee, is with us today. Matt, do you know an answer to that question?
I'll need to check, but I think for the 2020 ballot cycle, deadline's not until August of 2020.
Right.
But there is a window, you have a certain amount of time for signature gathering.
Yeah, I want to say it's
Once
6
you're
months.
printed.
I'll have to check. It's
Yeah.
something like 6 months after you're approved by, to start collecting.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
With the introduction of Matt, unless there are other questions, I would just comment lastly that consistent with your direction in years past, we'll be following 2 interim committees because we don't, obviously last year we followed the Gallagher interim as well, but it is not occurring this interim. But we'll be attending and monitoring closely both the interim Wildfire Matters Review Committee as well as the Water Resource Review Committee.
Okay. Yes, sir. Steve?
In the beginning of your remarks, Zane, you mentioned that you don't believe there's an appetite to repeat the 12-18 exercise that we all went through last year. But there's great concern that the Water Interim Committee or other groups of legislators may readdress that general subject area in the form of a bill. So I wanted to ask, rather than wait until our October quarterly meeting, could you please report back after each interim water committee meeting, particularly on in-stream flow conversations that may take place there? And I need to share that with constituents that had a great deal of consternation over that.
I would be happy
last
to.
session.
More than happy to.
Great, I'll watch for that, thanks.
Thanks.
I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
wanted to throw out, I think I talked about this at our last meeting. Summit County's been working hard with the Forest Service to change fire ban criteria. And I did give this information to members of that Wildfire Matters Committee. And it is federal and local, not necessarily state. So it may not really come up, but just for discussion matters. Anyway, basically, we're adding criteria social criteria is the big deal. So that when we in Summit County have, 150,000 people in the county versus our 30,000 that actually live there, it creates a lot of hazard. And we want to consider that in fire ban criteria, not just the science of the forest and the fuels, but those social criteria have a lot to do with the danger. And then also we're looking at just lowering the criteria so that we're not at 90% ERC energy release component, which means fuels are very dry. And because that's been the criteria of the national forests, and once we reach that, guess what? We already have fires going. So clearly the science is not adequate. Anyway, I shared that. I can't remember if I've shared that with you too. I'll send you our latest criteria changes, and it's in our fire management plan, and the Forest Service is not going to go along with it because they need to have national level support for it, but people don't really know when we have our CDOT signs saying fire ban, they don't know that it doesn't mean in that national forest. So, anyway, I'll send you that background information.
Thank you. Any other questions of Zane or of our lobbyist? Okay, thank you. What's next?
Thanks, Federal
Thank you, Gail.
Affairs. Thank you, Gail. Gail, unless you want to stay on, we'll hang up.
All right, thank you very much.
All right,
Okay, thank you, Gail. Yep.
I can move through the Federal Affairs relatively quickly, but things are happening. You all heard the announcement that the BLM headquarters are moving to Grand Junction, or at least that decision has been made at the administration level. Not surprisingly, that now the politics enter into that, and lots of naysayers about, well, I'm not sure that's been authorized or appropriated, and I think they're conflating some of the controversy around the reorganization that Mr. Zinke Secretary Zinke had proposed around unifying the various agencies, the regional agencies, into common regions across the agencies with this BLM reorganization, or simply a BLM move. Additionally, while BLM has 9,000 employees, the reports are that there are somewhere between 27 and 80 employees that will be relocated to Grand Junction.
They have 9,000 employees
Nationwide, yes,
Do
thank you.
Do you know how many they have in DC?
No.
400. 400, correct.
To 400. And a number of those moves would be a number of, not the 80 or 27, but the 400 that may be moving, they'll also be distributed around the West. But the headquarters will be Grand Junction.
And
That's the announcement.
It's my understanding that this first 80 that would be relocated to Junction would be the beginning, and there would likely be others that follow over time.
Good. Yep.
Is there a building that has that capacity, or does that mean a new building?
You know, I think we have several facilities that could meet the needs of a relatively small group of 80 or even more, but that's not to say that we won't see construction of a big new fancy federal building.
Yeah, well,
Well, if you need help, we can offer an annex building over there in Rio Blanco County.
Bad idea.
Moving to the memo and just highlighting a few things that are topical and the subject of our focus and energies. The infrastructure remains a hot topic of little movement. There's lots of legislation introduced, including let's see, the name of it is the Drought Resiliency and Water Supply Infrastructure Act by Senator Gardner and Senator Feinstein that was just introduced a couple weeks ago and has a hearing today for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And I mentioned that in particular among the various infrastructure bills that have been introduced on both the House and the Senate side, because Senator Gardner was very generous and reached out to us and asked for our input. It does a variety of things. It provides some low-interest loans. It encourages new construction. It also has a $10 billion price tag, which may be a little difficult, but it is consistent with the administration's call for a bold and large infrastructure financing and funding bill. And please feel free to interrupt me as I go along anywhere in this. Congresswoman DeGette and Neguse have Congresswoman DeGette has reintroduced her Colorado wilderness legislation. We've seen this now for at least 8 Congresses in over a 19-year period. It probably has a much better opportunity for movement, at least within the House this year. And it is 33 different areas. It would increase Colorado's wilderness designated acreage by 20%. It has a variety, it pretty much covers every congressional district except for hers.
Except for
For designation. It's, I think that's, that and the CORE Act, the Wilderness Bill, we've discussed several times. That has now passed the Natural Resources Committee on a largely partisan vote, but it is moving in the House, and I suspect that it will move on to the floor and pass the House, and then probably not get a hearing in the Senate. Let's see, you mentioned fire borrowing. The disaster aid package that was the subject of some news highlights did include some backfilling for fire borrowing. Remember, yes, fire borrowing was addressed and solved with some other money, but that solution doesn't begin until the next fiscal year. So importantly, in the disaster aid package that was passed last month, there was, I think, $735 million, and the number sticks in my head, that specifically was to address fire borrowing for this year. But all of that is subject to local priorities and funding activities that are at both the regional and forest levels. They continue to be a challenge, though the forest water nexus continues to be a focus of our efforts at both the federal and the state level. Peter, I don't think you covered the WOTUS activity, did you?
It was
It's in your report.
but we
Okay.
did not
Yeah, just,
verbally
yeah.
report it.
Waters of the United States, the definition of waters of the United States continues to be focus of River District and U.S.-wide water water focus and concern. And we'll let Peter's memo stand on its own and my highlight. The only other item of highlight before I get to budget was the tax equity or the rebate equity act has been reintroduced that would allow water rebates for water conservation to be treated the same as energy rebates. Energy rebates are not reportable as income. Water, that's explicit in the federal code. Water rebates, so whether you're getting cash for grass or a low flush toilet, the utility or the entity providing you with that rebate is obligated to send you a 1099. You're obligated to list that as other income on your tax forms. Doesn't exactly encourage either a relationship with the entity that provided you and encouraged you to implement conservation, nor does it encourage conservation itself. So we're trying to address that issue. Budget issues continue to will always be a focus. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has some plus-ups in the House bills, some additional wildland fire management funding plussed up in the House Appropriations Committee, a mini omnibus, a mini package of appropriations bills move through the House, continue once again perennial talk of passing the appropriation bills on time to fund the government through the proper appropriations process, what's called regular order, by the end of the fiscal year in September. I continue to be skeptical, and certainly history is on my side, but it's the effort is underway. I mean, we are seeing considerable movement in the House. But the Senate still hasn't even come up with a budget resolution for how much money that it is they're working on appropriating. One other item for legislation is Bolt's Ditch. We celebrated in April the fact that Bolt's Ditch legislation, which is really just Bolt's Ditch access legislation, passed that allows Minturn to rehabilitate the head gate for Bolt's Ditch, which is that far into the wilderness area, and allows them subsequently to rehabilitate Bolt's Lake and use that as a water supply resource for Minturn and the Upper Valley. Now, a new bill has been introduced sponsored at the request of the Eagle River Water and Sanitation District to include the Eagle River Water and Sanitation District as an eligible party for receiving the permit. So they also have permission to be a permittee for that rehabilitation. And so my recommendation is we support that. I've been supporting that. It is early in the process and hopefully will not take the 7 years that the Bolt's Ditch access bill took. But, and it is a simple amendment to that bill that passed as part of the public lands package earlier this year. So very quickly, so we're focusing on the budget, drought resiliency, tax rebate equity for water, land and water conservation fund, and Bolt's Ditch. That's really where our focus is on federal affairs. Your opportunity to let me know that you have concerns about other things and wish us to spend some time and resources elsewhere.
Mr. Fresca.
I think that's a very relevant federal agenda, thanks.
Yeah.
There's one other bullet under your federal affairs highlights.
Yep.
And that is, it caught my attention, that is former Interior Secretary Sally Jewell is taking over
Yes.
as interim CEO of the Nature Conservancy. But what really caught my attention was this statement that TNC has been rocked by harassment and misconduct scandals.
Yes.
Can you share with us what those are?
That their CEO resigned amidst news stories of some gender issues. I don't know. I mean, I don't have any details, but yes, he resigned.
You weren't involved?
I was not involved.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that's as much as I know what I read in the papers, but that the significant issue was that Sally Jewell is the interim CEO for the Nature Conservancy.
Interesting.
Yeah. No one's immune. Nope. And if I may take just 2 minutes of personal privilege, we recognize Lori DiPaolo's tenure with the River District. This July meeting marks my 28th year and therefore my 112th quarterly meeting.
Who's keeping track?
And I want to let the board know this will be my last quarterly meeting. It's been my privilege to serve and work with you all, and it's been a pleasure, and the best part of it is getting to not only work with you, but get to be friends with you all and develop relationships with each of you. And I will miss it. It is with definitely mixed emotions and mixed feelings about choosing to be one of the four that Director Mueller mentioned, or General Manager Mueller mentioned, as taking advantage of or simply making the decision to retire. My wife's been fully retired now for a couple years, and she has made it clear last year that if I wasn't going to join her, she was going to spend the retirement money by herself. So she's a very effective lobbyist. But I will say that I've enjoyed working with all my colleagues and want to stress to you all that I am absolutely confident that I leave the district with a heavy heart, but I leave it in talented and capable hands, both at the department and at the district as a whole. My last day will be September 13th, with genuine regret that I therefore will not be, yeah, exactly, I will not be attending and part of the seminar, which
You
is.
can still come as a public member.
I can, except I will not be in the state. You have my commitment, that you have my undying attention and commitment to working right through September 13th.
We need to have a party or something.
Well, I take this news with really mixed feelings. I'm happy for you that you're pursuing the retirement that you worked so hard to earn. But, you know, even though you have brought on well-qualified, well-prepared people, there's still going to be a void for a period of time, or maybe a long period of time, the way I see it. And maybe that's because of our long-standing relationship. When I was first elected to the State House back in the early 90s, you were one of the first people that came pounding on my door to renew my interest in the River District. And I can't emphasize enough to the rest of you the great impact, influence that Chris has had in the legislature over the years on behalf of this organization and all of your constituents. His level of respect that he's earned over there is amongst the highest of all registered lobbyists. And I think that also is woven throughout the entire water community here on the West Slope.
Thank you.
And that's why I have such mixed feelings. You are staying in the area, I hope.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Congratulations.
Yeah. And I will be, I'm on the Water and Power Development Authority by governor's appointment. I will remain there. I will remain involved with Club 20. My involvement with Club 20 preceded my tenure with the River District. It will continue beyond that time, and some other activities that our paths will cross, and I look forward to it.
Chris, I want to, echo those sentiments too. You and I have worked together for nearly 30, well, actually, I knew you before you came to the district.
Yep.
You're with Unical. And it's been great working with you, and also as a down the road neighbor. So I expect to be seeing you continually around the community. So it's been great working with you.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
And I expect you to run through the tape.
Yeah.
Got a few more items on the agenda here to go through. Lower Gunnison project update. Mr. Kanzer.
Good morning. Tough act to follow. We'll distract you with some eye candy and some updates from what we've been doing as a follow-up to requests that we had on the Lower Gunnison project. Sonia and I will tag team, and hopefully this will fire up here. Okay. So as it's booting up, a little bit of a reminder. I think most of you realize Lower Gunnison project is a multi-year, multi-funding, multi-area effort to increase water efficiency in the Lower Gunnison, basically below the Aspinall unit, including 4 focus areas, so the tributaries. We'll show you a quick map. This picture will be familiar to Mr. Albee. He's there in the middle. I don't know if my pointer will work, but there he is. This took place in January, was the groundbreaking ceremony. Sonia and I, Martha and Andy were there. And so you'll see some familiar faces, and this really kicked off the first construction project after really 5 years of effort to get to that point. The primary funding that you've heard about is NRCS, RCPP. That alphabet soup stands for, of course, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Regional Conservation Cooperative Partnership. Anyway, so without further ado, here's the map you all know and love, where we're at. Those are the four, what we call focus areas: Uncompahgre Valley, North Fork, Crawford Country, and Bostwick Park. These are all federal projects qualifying for federal aid, financial aid, and we are leveraging that with USDA funding, excuse me. Most of these are reclamation funded, and this is really one of the first efforts to bring USDA funding together with USDOI interior funding. So we have a total budget of about $8 million from the NRCS to spend. This is how we've divvied it up, and it's a little hard to see here, but it's kind of about $2 million per focus area. And for those focus areas, it's a combination of on-farm, which are the sprinklers and irrigation efficiency, and off-farm, which is the piping and re-regulation facilities. And you can see here, Fire Mountain budgeted at almost 1.3 million, Uncompahgre 1.3 million, Bostwick Park, and then Crawford Country here with some smaller projects. And of course, we have some other smaller slices, management and environmental compliance, and some planning. We did quite a bit of planning to get these projects right for construction. And so as you drill down, this is what we've spent so far today. And so a third of that is that 1.3 million that we spent in the Uncompahgre Valley. That is in the ground operating today. Actually, most of these are all operating today. Fire Mountain is a 2-year project. So our piece of it, and we'll show you some detail, is complete. There's another reclamation piece to be completed next year, Bostwick Park, and so we'll show you that. I just want to give you the relative sizes of what we've spent so far. We spent about 2.5 million.
Fire Mountain's not quite completed. Got this last segment of big pipe coming in, big chunk, but small segment.
For our money.
For our money, yes,
yes.
yet to be spent.
Yep, thank you for that. So I'm going to turn this part over to Sonia. She'll talk about 3 out of the 4 completed projects.
Okay, so the Bostwick Park RCPP project involved piping about a half mile of the west lateral up in Bostwick Park, and the lateral piping and construction was completed with RCPP funds. The engineered design was completed, and construction management was completed using CRWCD funds. So in our presentation, we're focusing on kind of just giving you a quick snapshot of the before, during, and after. The first picture on your left is the before. That is the west lateral. The second picture in the middle shows them prepping that area, clearing, grubbing, removing structures. The entire pipeline is 32.5-inch HDPE pipe.
That's high-density polyethylene pipe, which is the fusible pipe. You'll see it here.
There were some challenges certainly with this winter. A lot of snow up there. So there's a tent that they had to construct and put up so that they can complete the fusing of this pipeline, and they had to do it within the tent, and they had some heaters in there and stuff. So yeah, a lot of adjustments that had to be made. But
so the interesting thing about this, Bostwick Park is pretty well funded, that Conservancy District. They went out and purchased this equipment, this welder. So it's a plastic welding system. They are offering it for rent for other projects. And so it's really interesting. They've got a long-term plan, even outside of what we're helping them with, to really modernize their system. And if you remember that map, there's a long snake. It goes probably 30-plus miles from the Silverjack Reservoir down to their service area. So they have a lot of work to do, and this is a key component of that And again, you can kind of see here how it works. You cut this thing, you shave it, you melt it, and you bring it together in the field, and it's actually stronger at the joint once it's completed than the actual native. And it's a thick-walled product. It's both easy to work with because you can bend it, throw it in, beat it up. It doesn't get damaged, but you have to weld it, and you have to do some care to put it together, and the fixtures and dealing with that thick wall is a little bit different. So it's a newer technology for a lot of our projects on the west slope, and I think a promising one for future projects.
How deep do they vary?
These, you can see here, below the frost line, here at altitude, it's probably 36 inches to 48 inches. 36?
36 to 48, yeah.
Deep.
Deep.
Mhm.
So the picture on the left is the trench downstream of the butterfly valve. DK and I were joking at first because we were like, what's BFV? Big effing valve, or what is it? Butterfly valve. So, and that is the hole in which they're selling the thrust block, and then the completely installed BFV. Along there, I think that wire that you had was also the electrical tracer. And it also, I think they had to install electricity to operate the manual gate that they had up there as well. So this is the air vent for the pressurized pipeline. You can see that they've covered the trench and are probably at this point reseeding the area. Next steps for Bostic Park are implementing their supervisory control and data acquisition, getting installed those main computers at their headquarters, and establishing the towers and the relay from both all the way up at Silverjack all the way down to their headquarters office in Montrose. So
We're only funding a small piece of that. It's going to be a very large, multi-phased approach to get from the reservoir all the way down with some structures that will all be automated.
I think it's around $100,000 that we're contributing to that. And that'll be interesting because I think there may be some things that we might have to do in certain areas with reclamation and for Homeland Security issues. But we have been communicating with them, and it seems to be going fine. North Fork focus area accomplishments to date. The entire North Fork piping project, segment 47, was about $4.7 million. The RCPP section again was about $1.3 million. If you want to go to the next slide.
And just as a aside, of course, those in this area understand, but the Fire Mountain Canal and Reservoir Company is a private entity. They are the operating entity subcontracted to the North Fork Water Conservancy District, which is contracted to Reclamation. So it's a very interesting thing. So there's really three parties involved. The funding and the day-to-day activities are really between the River District and the company, the private pitch company.
So that upper segment that you see there is the portion that's being piped under reclamation funding, salinity program funding. Everything down from that red line there is the RCPP funded portion. So you can see there at the, well, actually you can't see. So it starts at the bottom with some 10-inch pipe and goes everywhere up to the purple 48-inch pipe. That last segment of purple is the section that I think we're going to be focusing on, and they're getting the pipe in either last week or as I am speaking.
And this area is considered the extension. They, when Reclamation came in and incorporated what was already there, they not only added Paoni Reservoir as the storage battery, which is upstream about 30 miles. They extended this and they improved the whole system. They added this diversion point from the Rue Creek. This is the Rue Creek drainage. And this area is called Rogers Mesa. Again, correct me if I'm wrong or add anything, Mr. Director Alvey. But basically, it's a supplemental supply. This is the native supply. And coming from the east is the stored water comes in, combines, plumes over, and again, provides this supplemental water here. Excuse me, this is where the stored water comes in, siphons, mixes with the native flow.
This was an exciting project too. We were moving really quickly in November and December to get the contracting documents in place. We had decided at that point with input from North Fork and Fire Mountain to start at the bottom end of the system and to work our way up because it gave us more flexibility in terms of stopping points should weather become an issue during the project. They got it done. They did a great job, and there were some, I think, slight delays in delivery of pipe. Typically I think it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get your pipe in. And I don't know what was happening at that time, but it was starting to take about 4 months to get pipe in when they ordered it, so.
Yeah, so this is really large diameter HDPE. They had a storm, series of storms last year, which knocked out some of the main resin producers in the Gulf. Pipe prices went through the roof, availability went down. So this project was delayed actually a full year, and part of the reason I believe they delayed the upper section was to let the pipe prices come down. They have done so, they got a reasonable price, and this is gonna be fascinating to watch where they have to siphon over the river. This is gonna be under the watchful eye of reclamation. This is all salinity funding, this first piece. And so our money was able to buy down and make it more cost effective for the salinity application, and we're using that same formula for other salinity applications. And we'll talk about that some more.
You said it's siphoned over the river?
No, sorry. It goes under the river.
Okay.
I said over, I misspoke, to get the water across the river.
Thank you.
Next slide.
It's an inverted siphon.
So this is the lower segment of the Fire Mountain Canal extension, I think in an area they call Stingley Gulch. Is that right, Tom?
Yep.
Right, okay. And this is them preparing the canal or the ditch prism so that you can lay the pipe. Pipe comes in on these big semis, you have to unload it.
Again, this is the PVC pipe. The lower section is PVC, the upper section HDPE.
This is the installation of the pipeline there. You can see it's kind of happening along and in within a fruit growing area. This is following the project, just they refilling that canal prism and seeding. Uncompahgre project. Again, the RCPP funding served as buy down for the entire Phase 9 project, which was funded under the Salinity Control Program. Our portion of that project was the GB and GBA lateral piping. It's about 17,846 feet of pipe. This is the before picture. Here's the after. It's pretty exciting when you see these big trucks come in, because they come in on the highway and there can be anywhere from 60 to 80 trucks with all this pipe on it, and it just comes in and they're unloading and stockpiling and getting it out there. And when that pipe comes in, you have to be down there and ready to go. So that's pretty cool. That was February.
Another interesting thing about this project, maybe you all know, certainly Mark, you know, the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users has an amazing staff. They do all the work. Reclamation does the design, and Uncompahgre is able to curate the funds and do all the construction, again, under the watchful eye of reclamation.
And this is actually occurring in the Bostwick Park area too. This is the Bostwick Park project, the RCPP portion was the first one that they took on and constructed themselves. The CRWCD funds allowed us to hire an engineer to oversee that construction management, so we're starting to build capacity within the areas that we're working in. And there's a huge saving by having these companies do their own construction versus going out on the street. So these are just some photos from the pipeline. You got a bend there in the pipeline. You can see how they do that. One of the water control structures there with the cement. Moving on. Oh, I thought we had a finished one. Anyway, so Crawford Country, DK is going to take over here.
And so the Crawford Water Conservancy District in Delta County, made up of a lot of private ditch companies. They have an off-channel, it's a fascinating project. Crawford Reservoir is off-channel, takes water from Smith Fork, puts it in the reservoir as a supplemental supply, same concept, and then they redistribute it downstream through a parallel system. There's two different systems, one for direct diversion and one for this stored water supplemental supply. The Needle Rock Ditch NRD is one of these. It's actually upstream. They've got a complicated set of exchanges, but this is the first one that we're able to get in the ground. This is a similar objectives to all the others, increase efficiency and operability. This structure, pretty old, very difficult to adjust. We did address it through a new structure, piping and SCADA, which is the automation, in conjunction with a comprehensive plan to integrate additional systems downstream, and they're looking at some additional work down canal. This is one of the first phases. So it's within sight of the pilot rock that we talked about earlier. Different system, but just an example of where it's located east of Crawford. Diverts about 60 CFS. We put in not only the head gate and structure, but about 975 feet of pipeline for a cost of about $400,000. The before, you can see it's just a jungle down there, very difficult to access. They would just set it and would have a lot of difficulty. It was basically an inoperable head gate, so they would just be wrestling this thing year in and year out. And so, sort of at the whim of the old system. Fast forward to this modernized structure, we'll have local control with the stilling basin, constant head, long-crested weir, and fish passage. And this next picture kind of show a little bit more, but looking downstream on the right, this is the new structure, headgate intake. Looking downstream again, this is where the fish will come up and enter with an excellent way to clean the structure, return the fish and trash. So it's a self-cleaning system. We're still tuning it, but they were down there just yesterday and completed some of the final tuning. And again, looking now upstream at the structure, you can see that this is the return where the trash and the fish would come out. The fish would come up. This is a barrier to upstream migration. There's a structure here, a gate for overflow, and the fish come up here and move through the system. So it's a huge improvement for those folks.
Colorado Trout Unlimited came in after and brought in the funding for the fish passage. The CRWCD helped with the design.
So this is what we kind of alluded to. This is what we're trying to do in all 4 focus areas, is to bring in the supervisory control and data acquisition to do the remote monitoring control measurements, whether it's local control or remote control. These are where technology and where these companies are interested in going, and we have components in each of our projects to implement SCADA.
On-farm activities to date, so far we've completed 22 conservation activity plans for landowners. Of those, about 18 submitted their projects for consideration for construction funding. We had a ranking committee established, and they selected 15 projects for funding. In total, right now, we're estimating that to be about $1.03 million. We've completed cultural resource surveys and NEPA compliance. We do have a total budget of about $1.86 million. We're not sure whether we're going to be able to expend that all. We might have to return a little bit back. The issue is if you don't have if you didn't ask for enough technical assistance funds up front, you therefore can't use a construction fund. So it's unfortunate. We were kind of given a low number based upon some suggestions from NRCS. Our engineering has turned out to be more costly than we initially budgeted, but we're working with that.
So the on-farm activities have been much more problematic, much more labor intensive from our point of view. We understand that it's really important to the growers. We're continuing to work with the growers and the NRCS. You probably understand this, but we are acting as an agent of the NRCS, subject to their rules and regulations. When we got into this game, we were under the impression, and even our contract documents suggest that we are actually able to make the decisions. They're saying, no, you need to have all of the I's dotted, T's crossed in the way that they like it. So everything we do goes through another level. And so we're still working with both the agency and even looking for legislative assistance through our congressional delegation to address this, because there's a new farm bill, there's new rules coming out for new funding opportunities, and we want to leverage lessons learned, not give up, but try to make a, how shall we say, better informed decisions with stronger language to let us continue to serve our constituents in a way that helps them leverage their opportunities.
Yeah, the River District will be seeking a one-year extension on our RCPP agreement, just because of the multiple delays we had with completing NEPA compliance and getting Washington DC approval on it. We've had multiple delays along the way, so we feel like we're justified, and NRCS, Colorado NRCS has said that they will grant us an extension, so.
And we did have to survive the government shutdown in the middle of all this. That really set us back, and
So weather, government shutdowns, yeah, the latest issue with the on-farm project was really, we went through this assignment of payment process where the River District wouldn't have to serve as an intermediary and handle those funds directly and then disperse them back out to Fire Mountain, for example. The idea was that we just approve the invoices, NRCS could pay Fire Mountain directly, and the money would be deposited into their bank account. I don't think nobody at NRCS fully understood that process, and it really didn't work the way we thought it would. Basically, if I submitted 5 invoices for payment, they would stack up one behind the other, and until the first one got paid, the second one couldn't get paid. And then the third one couldn't get paid, and then the fourth. So by that time, 2 months could go by. So we've gotten out of that. We've gotten back to the River District handling all the funds, and it's going quicker. And we're making those payments. It'll just mean that we have to do a single audit, and that Ian has to cut all the checks and Lucy, so, but that's okay. We got it running again.
And I would just add, I think Dave and Sonia are doing a great job with the assistance of our EA team and Jason on our legal team, and Alicia and Audrey on our admin team. It really is a kind of one of those all hands on deck to try
And
to.
Ian and Lucy.
And Ian and Lucy.
Is it County? County put money in?
And
Yeah,
Ian
we
and
got
Lucy. It really is, with the federal government, it's the local office, the state office, the federal office, the office in Arkansas that's got to get the payments processed. It is an unbelievable bureaucracy, and it is constantly having roadblocks thrown up in their face, and it can be a really frustrating experience, and it's helpful to have a full staff support on this, and it really is. It is a challenge. This on-farm in particular is challenging. I will tell you that, we're on the edge of really being able to make sure these producers get the federal funding that should go through this program, and we're pushing hard. We are, likely to be pushing through our congressional delegation in order to make sure it happens correctly. We already have been on other issues, but this one in particular, when it takes several months, and Jason, maybe you can tell me exactly how many months to get a simple contract language change approved through all the different layers of federal bureaucracy so that we can actually get the contract signed so that the project's engineering can be finished. It's incredibly frustrating. So I really appreciate the work of both DK and Sonia, but really the entire team as well, helping them out. So.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd just like to echo that this project, and you've seen some pictures showing the extent and the number of projects that are being done, this would not have ever happened without the River District, without DK and Sonia and the whole staff. And there's some really important improvements that are gonna help us for 50 years, 100 years down the line. So kudos to everybody involved. It has been, as Andy says, an incredibly frustrating process. But maybe the lessons they've learned through this go-around will help make the next go-around easier. And this is a project that the River District can be really proud of. Done a great job, so thank you all.
Regarding the project as an entirety, how has the state of Colorado been beneficial through this process?
Yeah, CRWCD, the state of Colorado, has been absolutely essential. In fact, the Colorado Department of Ag is getting into the game too, which makes sense, right? But most of the fundings come from CRWCB. What they do is they sort of front load the projects, giving us what we call technical assistance to do the design and permitting, and really allow us a much more flexible way to get this thing started, because have so many things to check off your list before you can turn any dirt. So they've been essential. Their cost share, while small in proportion, I would say is just huge in relative importance.
Very helpful,
And
very
we-
flexible.
Yeah, and so those are technical assistance dollars. The discretionary money, we're also going after WSRF, which, roundtable money and water plan money to help us fill in gaps as well.
I think that your remarks were really well said, Tom, and I would add to it that the success that is being enjoyed here, I believe, is really setting the table for a new area of emphasis on how the River District serves our communities and our constituents. So thanks for your great performance on that.
Thanks. And there's great technology, a lot of partners. CSU is another one I want to just highlight for the on-farm, really helping us out. I know we're running out of time, so let's just keep flying through here.
Yeah, so additional off-farm projects, we're gonna continue to make these areas more efficient, help them with better managing their waters, their existing supplies. They've got 2 projects going on in Crawford. That's the 4C regulating pond on the center clipper. And the Aspen Canal and Grandview integration project. Grandview is gonna be going forward for a salinity application. We're gonna be buying down the cost of that salt control with our RCPP funds, and hopefully they will get an award. Again, supervisory control and data acquisition in all 4 focus areas. We are going to be making future funding requests for more re-regulation and system storage and control ponds. For example, in the Fire Mountain Canal, there's a re-regulation facility we really need to make sure happens, and that we complete that portion of the project. So, future request.
So the last one is just the on-farm. We're going to continue going forward. We talked about some of these issues, and I mentioned the new farm bill. There's a whole new rulemaking process we're going to be involved in. These new monies will have new rules. The old money are subject to the old rules. So we're trying to figure that out. And at the same time, there's a salinity control program funding announcement out right now. That's key. That's really sort of the base funding that we're leveraging. We're going to continue doing that, working to make more cost-effective applications going forward.
Yeah, I think just big things with the new farm bill, important things for you all to note is that we'll be able to use EQIP dollars to fund those near farm projects now, and a ditch company, instead of it being a bunch of landowners having to come in to put forth that proposal, now a ditch company could be the entity coming in and putting forth the proposal for the near farm.
Or the River District.
Or the River
Or local
District.
conservation
Yeah.
districts, or even the state of Colorado. And those rules have not been written. We're not sure how it's going to work. We are curious. We're not committing to that yet, but we want to understand those new rules as they get developed.
And FYI for the board, we also understand that if the River District, for instance, wanted to go back into RCPP and ask for a second pot of funding or portion of funding, we won't have to compete at a nationwide level. Because our project's ready, we have the NEPA compliance, we could essentially just go in, ask for the funds, and we may be granted them. Again, all the details are, the devil's in the details, but hopefully we'll hear something back from NRCS soon about what that looks like.
And it's amazing that you guys both remain optimistic after all the challenges. So, I'm glad that you are.
Sick, you wanna do this again? No, and yeah, thanks to our EA team and others who kind of have brought attention to this issue and our needs in the area and trying to get this legislation passed through, so it's a good thing.
And we just close with this picture of Needle Rock. This is the volcanic remnant in Crawford Country, which is sort of their signature feature. And one of the perks of this job is being able to go to places like this and work with the growers who are really salt of the earth, amazing folks.
Questions?
Keep moving forward.
Good project. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
As a sidelight to this whole program, when No Chico Brush Group was formed, which is kind of the group of people that are started this, and the growers are kind of the recipients of this. So they came to the Gunnison country and they said, would you like to be involved? And of course, nobody said, well, we don't irrigate that way or any of those kinds of things. But ultimately, Perry Cabot talked me into lending my place for some stuff. And so just, excuse me, real briefly, for the last 3 years, we've been trying to play with some automated head gates in a flood meadow situation. And the initial concept was to have them operated by soil moisture sensors. And we haven't got that far yet, but it's been a real educational process for Perry, because he did not understand when he came into that country that so much of our irrigation depends on aquifer level.
right.
And so it's been an education for him. It's been an education for Jesse Kusoff, who was kind of his man on the spot, or Perry's man on the place. And so after a couple of 3 years playing with their automated head gates, they asked me how we could go further. And I said, well, that's too expensive stuff, and it's just, I mean, it works, but it needs to be different. And so they said, well, come up with your own design. So what I've suggested that they do is we work with a contractor and we come up with concrete structures that we can precast and go out and put them in the ditch and then put the automated stuff within the concrete. And if the automated stuff doesn't work, you still have a concrete head gate that you can use boards in, or metal gates or whatever, you know. And so we got 10 concrete structures put in this spring, and they were going to have the automated gates. Well, one automated gate became available last week, and I said, no way, you're not going out there in that hay with it now. So look forward for more of that. This particular area that we're working in, I think soil sensors would really work, because we don't depend upon groundwater so much in that area to cover other areas. So it's been a learning experience for all of us, but I think ultimately we can learn some things and apply them as we go forward for our kind of country. It's entirely different than these other areas, but I just wanted you to know there's other things going on that are kind of distantly connected.
Anybody else? Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, DK. Always appreciate your updates. Before we move on to our last agenda item, within our last agenda item, we have a couple of action items, and I just want to take a poll. Are we about to lose anybody else?
Yeah, pretty quick.
Okay, so let's move the agenda items around. Let's, if we could move straight to the concessionaire contract approval.
Yeah, I asked Cutter to take that.
Item 12D is in Eagle River Park.
So we discussed this at the January meeting, but our current concessionaire, Red Mountain RV, Jeff Miller, his contract is set to terminate in October. So with that in mind, the staff published an RFQ this May for a new concessionaire. It was consistent with the revenue changes and some other changes that we presented to the board in January. We sent out that RFQ. We got qualifications from 4 different companies. The staff reviewed those qualifications and narrowed it down to a short list. We interviewed 2 companies and are now recommending that we enter into contract with Pass Creek Investments after evaluating the criteria that they submitted in their RFQ and also based on our prior experience with them. So Pass Creek Investments is owned by Doug and Kristen Pruitt, who also own Grand Power. We contract with them at Wolford for electrical work, and we've been doing that since 2009 and have had a really good working relationship. So that's the background on how we came to our recommendation.
And it was written up beautifully in the memo, so does anybody have any questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Motion Richard, second Trampy. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? All right, passes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item we're gonna take up is the Eagle River marketing. Who's doing that? Is that you, John?
Well, I think Peter and I can tag team it. You have a memo in your board just kind of outlining kind of an update on Eagle River MOU stuff. And Eagle River water marketing is semi-related. You know, we came to the board in April and had a discussion about modifying our water marketing policy for a limited period of time to allow entities within the Eagle River Basin to obtain contracts for more than 20 acre feet. And there, I think there was some, unfortunately, probably my fault, we had some miscommunication with the board and just sort of maybe some inconsistency with our water marketing policy. And we wanted to bring this item back to the board for clarification. And I think maybe Peter, you could.
Sure. Thanks, John. I would correct that. I don't think it was your fault. I think it was probably my fault. But in April, you approved an amendment to the water marketing policy that allowed for a period of 1 year for staff to enter into contracts of up to 50 acre feet per contract for Eagle River Supply. Your existing limit was 20 acre feet per contract. And the reason for that limit was the relatively small amount of Eagle River water marketing supply. It's always been limited to some extent. The issue is that the policy is written in a way that is a limitation per contracting entity, not per contract. That makes sense because you want to limit the total amount per entity, not per contract. So the correction that we would request today is that you simply clarify or change the policy that you adopted in April so that it is specific to per contracting entity, not per contract. That would be so again, for that 1 year period starting in April of this year, a period of 1 year, allow a single entity to obtain up to 50 acre feet without coming back to the board for a further request. Now, this is, this change was initiated by possible anticipation that constituents might need more than 20 acre feet. That has not yet come to fruition. It may still within this 1 year period, and in fact, it may be even more than 50 acre feet. So it's possible we could enter into a contract for a total of 50 acre feet, or a series of contracts for a total of up to 50 acre feet, and still need to come back to you for an additional request if that or any other entity asked for more. That hasn't happened yet. We'll do that if and when it does happen. The specific request today is simply that you amend the policy that was amended in April to specify it's per contracting entity, not per contract.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved Albee, second Trampy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carries.
Thank
Okay, so now John, if you want to go back to the project operation updates.
Well, I think you have a comprehensive memo in your file related to all the work that's gone on at Wolford. I would ask Ray to entertain any questions you might have or to provide some comments related to all the outlet works work that's gone on. You know, Ray has been hugely responsible for getting all this work done that's been done this year, and my hat's off to him for actually making this happen. Ray has essentially lived up at Wolford Mountain Reservoir for the last 2 months while the contractors replaced the main gate, and we've continued to do other work in the outlet works. In fact, Ray and I spent all day in the outlet works the day before yesterday. So,
anyway, the main gate's installed and functioning well. We've only cycled it a couple of times, but we'll do a few more cycles on it just to be sure that we have no problems. The dive team is demobilized. The barge and crane that you saw in the nifty pictures is all gone. My home away from home for a couple months there. Kind of miss it. As John mentioned, we were in the outlet works last week and then again this week to reinstall the guard gate seal. So at the very end of the pipe inside the tower is a gate called the guard gate, which allows us to keep water out of the conduit through the dam if the outlet tower gates are for some reason non-functional. And so it's, you know, belt and suspenders, but now it has its rubber seal back in the bottom of it. We actually modified the seal from the original design, which kept failing, and put reinforcing in the rubber and ribs on the bottom of the retainer bar, and so we think we'll have better luck with it. We had some issues still with our 96-inch butterfly valve that we've been working to resolve, and hopefully we can get wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. We installed a davit crane at the outlet works to enable us to lift things from the bottom of the outlet works to the ground level where we can put them on a truck easily, and much improved access. Before we were having to hand lower buckets of tools or sandbags and whatnot, or climb up a ship's ladder, which is a real steep stairway with this stuff. And now we have a push-button crane that makes it painless and safe and much better to do our job. And we still have to replace a 30-inch butterfly valve that's on order, but still on track for delivery in late August. So then the actuators for the main gate and the guard gate, the main gate actuator had some issues related to water getting into the cabinet, so we cannibalized parts from the guard gate to make it work. And the new parts that need to go into the guard gate actuator are expected any day, and we'll get those installed as well. So things went pretty well. You all have talked about the weather before, and we had weather. So I was there 7-8 weeks, took my mountain bike, rode it 5 times because of snow or wind or lightning, pretty much on schedule every afternoon. We had some sort of weather, but the dive crew did a great job and overcame a few items of adversity along the way quite ably. It was a pleasure to work with them.
I was very impressed with our contractor, MDS, on the work they did. I think they did an excellent job.
Hey, anyone have questions for Ray or John? Anything else that you
You know,
want
they're
to talk about?
also included in the report, we just said, hey, you know, the risk study report's done. We talked about that yesterday. I don't think we need to dwell on that today. I business says there's an elkhead reservoir update there. We really didn't put together a memo on operations. I think everything's business as usual at elkhead, operationally and functionally. I don't think there's really anything going on.
No, we've had trouble with the SCADA there for a couple of years, and we're gonna go to, rather than a radio-based SCADA, a cell phone-based SCADA, so we're in the process of that. We have cell phone-based SCADA at the Kobe pump station, and it works really well. So we should be able to get the SCADA back online by this fall. We have to work with the power company on putting up a pole and an antenna where there's cell phone service. Right now, you have to drive to the top of the hill if you want to make a phone call. We're going to kind of use a relay to a pole that will erect on district property to be able to have cell phone-based SCADA.
Is the fish screen working with all this high water?
So the fish net has worked well. Last year, it submerged at about 600 CFS, even though it's supposedly designed for about 2,500. The contractor came back and put in an extra row of floats. So it had 10-inch floats on it. They put a whole new row of 8-inch floats on it. And there was no submergence observed this year at all. So Parks and Wildlife has taken over maintenance of it, and they have a better notion of how clean it needs to be to function coming into spring runoff. So I think they're doing a better job of keeping it clean. And then also when we evaluated it initially, or Parks and Wildlife did, the floats come together, the rope to support the nets in the middle of the floats, and so the net is slightly below, and there's a little gap. So they were finding little fish downstream, and so when they put the second row of floats in, they put it in to raise the downstream wave skirt enough to block that. And this year the fish surveys showed no fish downstream. So we had a couple little issues. We seem to have gotten them solved. And the fish net seems to be working just fine.
Any other questions for John? For Ray? Anything else you have?
I did have a quick update on Eagle River MOU, because there hasn't really been a whole lot going on the Eagle River MOU stuff in the last year, and so we haven't updated the board in a long time on what's going on. So it's mostly been process related in the last year, and honestly, I will say I think we're still dancing around a few elephants in the room that someday we're going to have to address. I think largely right now the home state partners, Colorado Springs and Aurora, are kind of headed out trying to move their alternative of a project forward to get the 20,000 acre feet of yield that was contemplated for them in the Eagle River MOU. And so they're continuing forward on their work. And you may have seen a report in the paper from the Aspen Journalist from Brent Gardner-Smith about, which I haven't read yet, about the Home State Partners exploratory drilling on dam site because they need to do follow up on seismic work that was done a couple years ago. The seismic work that was done a couple years ago was done collectively by all the Eagle River MOU partners. And then last year we kind of parted ways, and Home State Partners are continuing on that work themselves. So will they do drilling on those potential dam axes this year? I asked Kevin Luss from Colorado Springs Utilities what the Forest Service had done with their SF-299 application for that, and they said, well, they acknowledged that they received it, which means that they may act on it and get something done this year, or they may not. But again, it's more process, been more process related than moving forward. It's moving mostly circular.
Okay, any questions on the Eagle River MOU? Anything else, John?
No, that's it, thanks.
Okay, that's it on that agenda item.
Last item is the future meetings.
Future meetings, please note that if you want to do the CBT tour, you need to RSVP to Lucy by the end of this month.
So the CBT tour is a west slope to east slope tour of the CBT system. And the board did this with Northern 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, Chris.
Well, it's been more than 10 years since Northern has even offered this kind of west slope tour. It is not this time, nor was it then just for the River District. There were board members involved in several, they had done it annually, but it's been about 12 years since they have offered this.
So it's definitely something worthwhile, worth doing. I did it back when I was on the board. And it is worth learning how their system works. You guys, we spent a lot of time talking about the impacts of that system on the Colorado River, and it is not a bad idea to see it up close and personal. So if you're interested or able, please do respond to Lucy.
Can you give a preliminary, anybody just raise their hand, just whether they're hoping they will be able to go? I
I've
just wanna-
already registered.
You've already registered, great.
I did it directly with North.
With Northern, that's great.
What was the date of that again?
29th of August.
29th of August. Okay, thanks. Northern was interested in just numbers.
Do you have anything else?
No, that's it. I really appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for all of your valuable input.
Lori has
Lori?
an announcement.
Just a reminder for the CWC Summer Convention, it is in Steamboat Springs in August. If you would like to attend that, please contact me for registrations, and if you need a hotel room, I would suggest that you reserve one very quickly. The room blocks fill up quickly for CWC.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Meeting's adjourned. Lunch upstairs, by the way. I think. I don't know.
Should be,
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, it's been something I've worked for a long